Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Bald Move Pulp. We've got what's probably going to be an epic podcast for you today. It is 2001's The Lord of the Rings. This was commissioned by an enigmatic figure known only as Dr. John. And we'll get to his comments here in a bit, but I want to introduce the movie. Of course, this is directed by notorious Hobbit, Peter Jackson. It was written by himself, along with his longtime partner, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens. It was adapted from The Fellowship of the Ring, the first of the tomes in The Lord of the Rings by one J.R.R. Tolkien. It stars Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, Liv Tyler, Viggo Mortensen, Sean Astin, Kate Blanchett, John Rhys Davies, Billy Boyd, Dominic Monaghan, Orlando Bloom, Christopher Lee, Hugo Weaving, Sean Bean, Ian Holm. And even though he does not appear in this, I feel like it would be kind of shitty to leave off Andy Serkis. From the starring list, and it was scored impeccably, in my opinion, by Howard Shore. I love this movie. I love the books upon which they are based. It's going to be very hard for me to not just constantly, even more than I normally do, talk over and bushwhack poor Jim here. So I'm gonna let you get in early and hopefully often. What do you think? I want you to talk about because if people know Bald Move, they know that Jim kind of famously hates fantasy stuff. He makes exceptions, like, for example, early stage Game of Thrones, because it's decidedly kind of fantasy.
Yeah.
And I know that you actually kind of got caught up in the Lord of the Rings movies. Talk about your relationship with the material and what you thought about it then and what you think about it after having just sitting down and seeing the theatrical release of Fellowship of the Ring recently.
So my relationship with it is when I was 14, I think, I sat down to read The Hobbit. And I know Lord of the Rings fans right now are going, oh, fuck. Like, you messed up. You messed up because The Hobbit is a kid's book, right? And I didn't know that. And so I picked up the most accessible, or what I thought was the most accessible of the Lord of the Rings lore, The Hobbit, and I read some of that and I hated it. In fact, it might be the thing that turned me off of fantasy in general, is that experience with that book. And so, I had friends growing up who were way into Lord of the Rings, you being one of them. I had a few other friends, like a lot of people in our friends group were Star Wars fans and Lord of the Rings fans, primarily.
How did we get away with being Lord of the Rings fans? I know I did, because when the movies came out, I was a grown-ass adult in my own house, and nobody could tell me otherwise. But I'm honestly shocked at how many kids and teenagers were allowed to engage in Lord of the Rings stuff as a Jehovah's Witness.
Uh-huh.
Do you have any insight on that?
Because they're famously anti-magic.
Oh, yeah.
This should be anathema to them, but I don't know. I honestly don't know. Everybody was sneaking it, I guess.
It felt like it was more open, though. We were talking about this stuff in field service and whatnot. I wonder how much of it is broadly that this is a Christian allegory that they kind of snuck in.
You think our parents were that savvy and knew that? Because they hadn't read it, right?
Well, my mom, like I said, I was moved out, so I know she did not approve and told me pointedly. But again, I had my own house I was running, so fuck her.
Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, so I had that experience when I was 14, and then I just kind of soured on it, and all my friends were really into it. And so when the movies come out in 2000, when the first movie comes out in 2001, I was there in the theater watching it with my friends. And I started to get into it because honestly, this is a fun and exciting film. The beginning of this film is very good. It's a good introduction to what I thought was going to be a main character, Bilbo. I thoroughly enjoyed the introduction to his character. I liked all of the Hobbits. I loved Gandalf. Everything is going great at the beginning, and then by the time you get to the end, there's so much exciting shit that's happened with the Balrog and fighting orcs and that final battle, with Boromir jumping in there. It's also exciting that I think I didn't realize, that the middle of this movie is kind of I think it's a shitload of setup for other movies. Because this is essentially an act one of a 3-act structure that doesn't happen in this film, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I think I don't know. I came away from this movie going, oh well, that was a fun experience. That was a ride, right? It's like a road trip movie. You know, it's fun. And so then I was like, well, maybe I can handle this stuff. And I didn't know anybody's fucking name. I didn't know the names of any of the towns. I was like, okay, well, they went to the place where they met this guy in the hood, right? Like, and then he turned out to be some fancy sword guy. I don't know. And so I could like keep up with the narrative, but you know, you guys were talking about it like, oh, but this means that, and that means this, and I don't know. But I was into it enough that I was like, okay, I'll see the next couple movies. How about you? You have a much more intimate relationship, right?
So I had a relationship with this guy named Ace Jace, kind of like yours was with mine. He was a tad older, you know, when I was 12, 13, he was 17, 18. And I kind of caught with him through his cousin Nate, who was a little like a year or two older than me. And they introduced me to, I had always been a science fiction nerd. I loved Star Wars, Star Trek growing up, and I never really got into fantasy because I was just a no-go with my mom, right? And I remember playing, I'm pretty sure it was Axis and Allies, and Ace, Jace, and Nate were going back and forth, and they started making these jokes about, you know, because it always comes down to these giant stacks of infantry in Russia, right?
So in the board game, so in the war. Shall not pass. Kind of joke.
No, there was that, but the thing that, because I was probably because I had zero exposure to this stuff, I was kind of drawn to the macabre. Like some of my formative experiences were like being at a thrift store waiting for my mom to get done shopping for secondhand suits for me, and like, you know, finding a book on the Salem witch trials and like reading people being burnt at the stake and shit like that, and like it just like. And they start talking about like, when this is done, something about I'm gonna take your men's, or at the end of one round of combat, he took all the chips and said, these are your men's heads. I'm loading them in a catapult and I'm shooting them over the walls of Stalingrad or whatever. And I'm like, what? And they're all laughing. And I'm, what are you guys talking about? And he mentioned that like, there's something in Lord of the Rings they do to like break the spirit of the kingdom of men. And I'm like, I've got to read these books. And I checked them out of of course, the school library had them all. So I started reading them somewhere between 12 and 13. And it's like the very first fantasy I ever read. And that kind of, because at that time, Star Wars and Star Trek had both kind of been at a, Next Generation was over. I think Deep Space Nine was like kind of, you know, wrapping up or whatever. Star Wars had gone fallow. And I'm like, I'm going to go way into fantasy now. And I just love those books. I read everything that I could get my hands on regarding them. And then, you know, when they announced that the movies are going to come out, my first reaction is there's no way they're going to do justice to these, because my entire life has been, my entire life has been getting excited about a movie based on a book that I really, really like. You know, whether it's Tom Clancy.
And this was after episode 1 came out, right?
It might have been. I was like, or getting hyped up for something they're going to adapt from a book series that I loved, and then it's just never ever going to be as good, especially if you're talking like made for TV movies or any kind of adaptation. But then you started hearing about like, you know, Peter Jackson's a real fucking Lord of the Rings geek, and he's hired this guy Christopher Lee, who's this old respected horror film actor, and he's like was BFFs with J.R.R. Tolkien, and you started seeing some of the pre-production work come out, and, you know, Ian McKellen famously ran a blog that kind of documented his whole experience filming it, and I slowly started to get hype, and then I remember there's a scene in the books where Gandalf has to be stern with Bilbo because Bilbo is not wanting to give up the rings, and the books describe like Gandalf as like swelling with immense power and like Bilbo's house groaning it can't contain. And I'm thinking like, that's one of the first scenes that like, if they nail that, then I'm going to be in good shape. And it was such a simple trick because they essentially just dropped the bat. Like it felt like Gandalf sucked all of the light from the room into himself. And just through his physical performance, not like he actually grew, but it looked like he grew in power and intimidated Bilbo, but then instantly turned back into the grandfather. And I remember like relaxing and being like, holy shit, they're going to nail this. Because that's a really subtle job that they could have done. Whiz bang, they could have gone all kinds of different directions, but it felt real, like in a nuts and bolts, like this is a real place kind of thing. And from then on, like these movies were the most hyped I've ever been about anything. Like it's the Two Towers, The Return of the King. I went to a special engagement when when there's a traveling exhibit of all the like props and costumes and stuff from the movies that was going like town to town, and it came to Indianapolis and it was going to be there for like 30 days. And Indiana State Museum has an IMAX theater built into it, and they screened all of the theatrical releases. You could buy for like $100. You could buy a ticket that they showed them all back to back to back, and then at midnight opened the doors to the exhibit. And I didn't get home till like 4 o'clock in the morning. It was this amazing experience, and it's been like one of my dreams to go to New Zealand and like tour Hobbiton and like all the sets that they still have kind of up and go to all the different locations. I'm saying that I'm ate up with this film, and it's been about a decade since I've been that into something, because I've gotten into a bunch of other things through Bald Move, and probably half the deep Lord of the Rings lore that I used to know has been deleted in favor of deep Game of Thrones lore.
Sure.
But I still like this year. I can't remember when, but Kim Renfro, I guess, has this tradition with her husband where they watch all of this extended editions on some weekend each year. And she was tweeting about it, and me and Cecil like, it's been a long time since we've seen them, so we fired them up too. And then that led to me buying the Blu-rays of the extended editions, and Cecily had never seen the like bonus material, so we watched all of them, watched a couple of commentaries, watched like 10 hours of. It's Dr. John's going to get his fucking money's worth, because I'm coming into this thing organically ready to talk about it.
Yeah. I'm glad you are, because this is only the second time I think that I've seen this. I know, we used to have board game parties and just like playing Magic the Gathering or whatever growing up with our friends group. And so like this has been on in the background, and I'm sure the extended cut has been on in the background when I've been at one of those parties. But this is really only the second time I've seen this entire movie all the way through. And I did watch the theatrical cut for this podcast. So I don't know. Like, I still don't know. Like, okay, I know Boromir's name now. I know who Aragorn is. Like, I picked up, like, the names of the main characters. But if you ask me where the hell, Gimli is from, I don't fucking know the name of that place. I know there's... I know
or the character, apparently.
Gimli?
Oh, who Gimli is? Okay, I thought you said where Gimli was, like it's a location.
No, where he's
from.
From.
Where Gimli's from.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, like I'm still not going to know that stuff, but
right.
So I don't have a ton to say about this from a lore perspective, obviously, but I think you'll be able to handle that more than capably.
I hope so. Maybe before we get much further in, we should read Dr. John's Deado, because like we're gonna get. He's also got some lightning round questions for the end that we'll return to. But Dr. John, who commissioned this podcast, says, "I watch hundreds of movies each year, but this remains my number one all-time favorite movie. I know the movie's long, but I was hoping you guys would excuse it because you've almost certainly seen it before. The theatrical cut and technically comes in under 3 hours. I'm an inpatient physician, so while my life has been shit for the past 5 months, my financial situation's pretty stable. Thus, he pulls the trigger on this commission. Thank you so much for all the incredible insight and entertainment that you guys have provided over the years." Aw, that's very sweet. Thank you. I just want to dedicate this podcast to all the listeners struggling through COVID-19 pandemic. I hope this podcast will provide a bit of reprieve for everyone. I actually just finished reading the book for the first time after innumerable movie watches, and I really feel the film is an improvement on the source material, as blasphemous as that sounds. Well, I got some heresy later on too, Dr. John. So
me too.
I'll go down swigging with you.
Yeah.
I think I cut a lot of fat, as crazy as that sounds, with such a long movie. R.I.P. Tom Bombadil. I can't wait to hear you guys' thoughts on not only the film, but also its impressive production. Short of Christopher Nolan's magnum opus, I don't think we'll ever see an epic production with practical effects like this ever again. This trilogy was the Ben-Hur of our generation. I remember reading daily updates on the production online when I was in middle school. A day may come when the courage of Bald Move fails, but it is not this day. Thank you, Dr. John. Yeah, I'm saying, like, this back. Do you remember? Did you ever read Harry Knowles' Ain't It Cool News?
No, not really.
Because I got into that during the prequels and the Lord of the Rings, and that's where I got my daily doses of, like, what is this picture and what could it be and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't mind spoilers for especially Lord of the Rings, because hell, I'd read all the books, read the Silmarillion, all that stuff. But I hope I can do justice to the production, because maybe we can start there. this is a crazy deal, especially for at the time where Peter Jackson went to New Line Cinema and said, I want you to give me money and time to film all three of these unfilmable books. And I'm going to do it at the back end of the world, far away from Hollywood, across oceans. And I'm going to use a special effects company that's like essentially a farm team that I've built up myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to cast a whole bunch of people that you've never heard of. And I'm going to go away. And then a couple years later, you're going to get the first one. And we're still going to be desperately doing post-production, but we're going to film this whole thing. Nowadays, that happens quite a bit, you know, when they've got a well-regarded kind of sure thing trilogy But it's still kind of rare, and it worked. And I think that when you get into the production where you've got like there's like sometimes 5 and 6 active units filming all over New Zealand, which is a pretty big geographically diverse country to have filming spread all over. When you have this massive cast, like I just the cast list I read off is just like those are the A1 main characters, Mm-hmm. And you've got, I can't imagine the studio pressure on Peter Jackson. He talked a lot in the commentary about the studio forcing things in and like having problems and him picking his battles and all that kind of stuff. And the sheer amount of money that had to be flowing in and out. This is truly what you call an epic scale, especially since they were inventing special effects that had never been used before. That massive technology to render these giant armies.
That's one of the main things I remember about the production from contemporary with it being made is just them talking about the digital effects they did to generate like thousands upon thousands of digital characters in the background.
But I think some of the most impressive thing, and while I'll like as cool as the special editions were, it'll never replace actually going to this exhibit and seeing how this stuff works. But this stuff. Some of the CG is a little creaky because we're about 20 years beyond. Not often, but most of the things, like when you see Ian McKellen sitting across from Elijah Wood, and Ian McKellen looks like he's 6 foot tall, and Frodo looks like he's 4 foot tall. You can't see the seams because they're not there. They use this really complicated, when you've got Ian sitting across from a table from Elijah Wood's, Elijah is like 12 foot further into the background, and they use this gimbaled set so when the camera moves from one end of the table to the next, the table's cut in half, and it's got like some kind of complicated hinge mechanism that moves it, so even though he's 12 foot further away, the camera pans it and gets the appropriate parallax as if he's facing them, and they worked out the sight line so it looks like they're sitting, but like there is no compositing, there's no blue screen work for the vast majority. And even stuff like John Rhys Davies is like this massive man, he's like 6'3", 6'4". Elijah Woods is a tiny guy. So they got away, like anytime the dwarf is standing next to the hobbits, he looks like he's in perfect scale because dwarfs are smaller than men, but they're quite a bit larger than hobbits. And using those practical effects, like the two evil towers in the movies are these 12, 15 foot resin statues that they can just get crazy detail, and then they take cameras and swoop up and down them like they're helicopters, and it'll never look fake because it is real.
Right.
And so much of the stuff, and then they could spend the money where they have to nail Gollum, right? And he is still a effect that stands up really well because they spent the money to make it. I just think that if you watch these extended editions and all of the bonus material, I have to feel like it's about like going to a year's worth of film school, because it's not just like a behind the scenes like 15-minute thing of how we did it. They show like all the camera tricks. They also talk about how like this stuff ties into the story, and there's a whole like hour documentary on adapting the book to the film that talks about like their philosophy of making certain cuts and keeping some stuff. And it's certainly like I talk about the time that I went through the AFI Top 100. This movie and its bonus features kind of ignited that love of film for me. And I've heard several other people, like I think Lindsay Ellis says that the same thing happened to her, and that's why she went to film school, is because watching these special features made this thing go from being magical, which is amazing, to like, oh my God, this is something people can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these are techniques that can be learned. This isn't something that's like wizardry, right? It is. It's a lot of passion and ingenuity, but like, you can actually do it. And I think that no other film, and it's behind the scenes, ever made me feel that way. It's like, you know what? Why is my heart stir when this scene is happening? And Peter Jackson will tell me it's because I use this technique and that technique and that technique. And then I was obsessed. I want to go see like all, and he kept on referencing like, oh, I'm doing a Hitchcock shot here. And here I'm doing something that, you know, this is like the classic Casa blah, blah, blah. And I had to go see all that stuff to see like where he's pulling that material. So the reason I, you know, like this is kind of like the origins of Bald Move in a really weird way, because I don't know that if I hadn't gone through that appreciation of film, that like Breaking Bad and Mad Men reignited into that in me like 10 years later. I don't know that I would have sat down and gotten that much into the golden age of television had it not been for Lord of the Rings sucking me into the art. So it's my first of many soliloquies on this podcast.
Yeah, I'm actually impressed with how much they were able to accomplish with what I think by today's standards is a modest budget. This film had 109 million for its budget, which back then pretty big, I guess. Not a lot of movies were made above 100 million, but for today's effects heavy films, I don't know, the number of effects shots, the amount of effects work they had to do in these films, and the scale of everything, because everything is so epic in this movie. It's shocking to me that they were able to create it, especially when you consider the talent they hired. Those people were certainly getting paid. It's not like these were nobodies back then, right? And now they've become huge stars. No, they were some of the best in the industry. And so like getting them to do all this work in a $109 million budget, to me, is incredible.
And the other thing is, like, this seemed to be one of the happiest sets I've ever heard of. Like, there's a sad story about The Hobbit that came back and undid a lot of this stuff. But, like, all intents and purposes, everyone loved working here. They got paid fair wages. Like, there's multiple stories of, you know, like, they do this grueling year-long shoot. And, like, the Fellowship of the Ring got very, very close. They all famously got, you know, matching tattoos. They surfed together. They did a whole bunch of stuff. And like Peter Jackson was telling a story on the extended edition commentary where that establishing shot of Frodo, you know, where they establish him that he's not like other hobbits, you know, he's quiet and kind of bookish and off to his own. That shot is something that they did like 6 months after they wrapped the original shoot, and it's Elijah's first day being back at Frodo. And like before they filmed him, he was like doing this happy little jig because he's so excited to be back in New Zealand being Frodo again and get to see all of his friends. And like apparently, I mean, I just saw like last year on Twitter, the whole cast had gotten together spontaneously to kind of have a reunion, and they're all out drinking at a bar. Like everybody, Ian, John Rhys Davies, Sean Bean, you know, all of them are there having a great time. It not only was it hard work, but it seemed like it's something incredibly satisfying. You know, they hired artisans to like expert sword makers and armorers to like, you know, hey, here's this fantasy armor. Like, what would it look like if it was real, you know? And that's the thing that I came away with when I saw the exhibit is like, when you look at this stuff and you look at the stitching and the materials, like this is, it looks real. It looks like something a person would wear into battle. You know, before this, when I think of fantasy swords, I think of like Conan the Barbarian. He's got this chromed out, blinged out, you know, there's jewels all over and the hilt's this ornate thing. And you look at like Aragorn's sword in this, it's just a really nice sword, you know?
Yeah.
Like it looks like it would really cut people's heads off, where it also felt like a real tool, you know? And it was different from all the other shit, like Krull, you know, he's got this like crazy Chinese throwing star looking thing. And, you know, the Sword of Eternia from the Thundercats, like
sure,
everything was like this crazy ornate stuff. It didn't feel real. Or you remember when we watched, what was it? Was that King Arthur Excalibur? Where all the knights were wearing this like essentially 18th century chromed out like armor that no one ever has worn before in battle.
Sure.
This stuff is like, you can tell like craftsmen sat, like they hired they didn't go out and hire some crazy movie artist. They got like is it John Lee? They got the two best Tolkien artists who had been drawing shit for years, decades, and said, "Hey, you guys come in and design our sets.
Nice.
You guys come in," and the people that had the passion for, like Christopher Lee, who had corresponded with Tolkien before he died, and had goes through and reads the series every freaking year, this homage. Like, you get these guys in here, and they're actually making suggestions and improving dialogue. It all just came together to be. This could have been a mess, like, for all the reasons we kind of lined out, but I don't know if it's because it's Peter Jackson that kind of kept things grounded, but it's I don't know. It became more than the sum of all of its different parts.
No, it felt like everyone was as invested as Peter Jackson himself was, like, okay, It's one thing to have this idea and want to do it, but you need hundreds of people around you to have the same enthusiasm and passion. And I think just like finding the right people, I was impressed with actually the way that they did the whole digital side of this. This film essentially built Weta into what it is today. And when they were going out to do like digital effects, they didn't know how to do this shit, and they didn't have a team that could do it. So what they did, according to like the scant background I've seen on this in the making of and stuff, is they got a bunch of people who were into like who were just like students and like people who are passionate about doing this digital work. They hired them and said, "Hey, do you want to come make this cool thing with us?" And they were like, "Yeah, we'll figure this stuff out." And they talked with ILM, with Lucasfilm, on some of the previs stuff that they were doing at the time to just get all the shots, tinker with the shots and get them down to where they knew exactly. And it seemed like they had multiple stages of previs stuff. Like they'd have a physical previs with some of this, with Peter Jackson with a little camera on a rod, kind of zooming through models, framing shots. And then they had like digital previs. And I was just impressed with the sort of like, we'll get this done, to an insanely high level. Like it's not like these graphics are, oh, well, you can see that like they used a bunch of students and people who had never done this shit before to make this film. No, this is some of the best effects work of the time, right? It was amazing to me that they could get that done with a bunch of people who had never done it before, and it comes down to the passion. They've got to show up every day excited about what they're doing, and it seems like everyone on this production did.
Yeah, because it's going to be like a year-long crunch mode. From the person's making foam rubber orc masks to the person's doing, and like on the digital side, that stuff didn't stop.
Oh, like
even when this movie rolled out the door, their toughest technical challenge, bringing Gollum to life, lay ahead. And there's a reason, like you see Gollum for a fraction of a second in this movie.
Yeah, I thought it was a
Peter
lot
Jackson's.
More.
He said, "This is our alpha Golem," and Gollum. I'm sorry, and we knew we had to show him, but we tried to show as little as possible because we knew we weren't quite there with it.
Hands and eyes and a silhouette.
Yeah,
like that's really all you get.
Yeah.
I thought there was so much more Gollum in this movie.
Yeah, it's kind of like Jaws in that he's just established as this kind of shadowy menace, and you don't really get a good glimpse of him. But yeah, like it was, and the actors had to come back for reshoots, and there's a couple cases where I can't remember. I think it was a shot where the birds came back from the mountain to give Saruman a report where Gandalf was taking the hobbits, and I guess they had shut down production, and like all those big sets of like the mines below Isengard had been put in storage, and Peter Jackson's like calling people like, where is that stuff? It's like in 17 different pieces. We need to get it, screw it back together because I got a pickup shot I need to do on this set that's the size of a small church. Yeah. And they're like, okay, well, guess we'll get that done. And it was like this big piece, like 3 years of some of these people's lives. And they left it all out there on the screen. And it's something, like this movie, I fully believe this movie is going to be like King Kong. It's going to be like Wizard of Oz, where they will talk about it 100 years from now. It will still be like a culturally important, I mean, not maybe to the extent it is today, but it'll be one of those things where like people will still watch it and have fond memories of it. It's be handed down from generation to generation, just like the books have been. So What an accomplishment. It would be interesting to I wish we had time to talk about like what went wrong in The Hobbit, because The Hobbit is like the bizarro Lord of the Rings production.
I hate the Hobbit movies. I hate them. They're terrible.
I saw them all, and I've only seen the final Hobbit movie, the Battle of the Five Fucks or whatever. I've only seen that exactly once, because
I haven't ever seen it. I saw the first two and I was like, no, third one's not for me.
They're not great. They're not great. And that's not to say they're entirely trash fire, but like, but it's the like, okay, opening salvo of this conversation.
Yeah,
it is the anti-Lord of the Rings, because Peter Jackson had way too much stuff that he could possibly film in Lord of the Rings, and it was mostly platinum and gold. The Hobbit's the opposite. The Hobbit's like a 200-page kid's book, and he had to keep adding more, and like, let's pull stuff in from the appendix, let's pull stuff in from the Silmarillion, let's blow it up, let's make this a dark movie like Lord of the Rings, even though The Hobbit is not a dark movie. It does have some scary parts like kids' stories do, but it's like early going Harry Potter level. It's like book 1 or 2 of Harry Potter. It's not even like book 7 of Harry Potter, let alone a movie where people's heads are being chopped off and flung into a city to terrify the residents. Like, it doesn't have that gear, but they're kind of trying to force it.
No, the Hobbit should have been a 1-movie appendix to the 3-movie trilogy of Lord of the Rings, right? Like, you want to make it and have some fun, go for it, but don't try to make this a thing.
You could even make 2 2-hour movies if you really wanted to take your time, but the 3-hour movies is just insane. It's insane. And like, I don't think Peter Jackson wanted to do it.
Is that the dark side of the passion? Like, he's just got so much passion for this source material that he felt like, oh, there's an endless well that I can draw from here, and it'll just work.
I think Peter Jackson wanted the Hobbit movies to be made. He wanted his friend Guillermo del Toro to make them. There was some kind of dispute and falling out where that didn't happen, and now he's got all these people that are friends and colleagues that rely on him for a paycheck. You know, like all these people, all this industry that he single-handedly built in New Zealand, they're all like, well, come on, Peter, and he kind of like, God, who else would I trust to do it? And he kind of like forced himself to do it, and he was exhausted. Like, you know, you look at, that's the other thing, is like when I look at these special features and I compare them to like the special features on the prequels. And we even did a commission, one of our last commission podcasts in the first round was we did a look at the special features of, what was it? Revenge of the Sith?
I think it was called In a Minute or something like that.
Yeah,
it was like the 1 minute chunk and everything that goes into making it.
And it's not like there's no passion, especially because, you know, these people were Star Wars fans from their birth, and they're working on their dream movie. But you compare like George Lucas going through mock-ups of Jar Jar Binks and the expanded material for the Phantom Menace, and you look at everyone's kind of reaction. You look at like Steven Spielberg's honest reaction of his first cut of the Phantom Menace. You look at like, there's this like kind of like a pall cast over proceedings where everyone is so excited, but they're like, this isn't working for a lot of different complex reasons. Nothing is really working. And you look at these where Peter Jackson's run around barefoot, just excited, like, you know, going to this set, that set, like, you know, doing this. Oh, great job. Oh, that looks amazing. Oh, I can't believe it looks so cool. And like, just there's this energy. He's just this ball of energy. And you look at him, and he's also fat. He's also this little fat hobbit running around. And you look in the Hobbit, and he's like lost a bunch of weight. And maybe this is just, but he looks gaunt. He looks exhausted. And I just think, I think there was the passion there. It's just the money fucked it all up. You know, the demand of having 3 movies, you know, the disputes that led to the alienation of the first director and all that kind of stuff. We could do another epic thing just on The Hobbit. I'm terrified because we're like 40 minutes into this thing. We haven't actually began to talk about the movie.
You know, our podcasts tend to be runtime length anyway, so buckle up.
Yeah. All right. So should we start? Should we start formally talking about the
one
movie?
more thing real quick? I want to run down some of the awards that it won. So I talked about the budget for this thing was 109 million. It ended up making like 800, almost 900 million worldwide. So huge success. Awards wise, it got nominated for 13 Academy Awards the year that it came out, and it only won 4 of those, which, you know, saying, oh, it only won 4 Academy Awards is ridiculous. I'm sort of not surprised by the ones that it did win and the ones it didn't. So was the ones that it won were best makeup, best cinematography, best original score, and best visual effects. I mean, those
the
kind of seem like
technicals, yeah.
no-brainers. I was
Right.
surprised to see that it didn't win the best costume design. Of course, it was up against Moulin Rouge, which did win.
Mm,
So
hmm
pretty good design there in Moulin Rouge. But I lost A Beautiful Mind kind of cleaned up that year, winning Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay. Black Hawk Down was another pretty big one, winning Best Sound and Best Film Editing. So yeah, I mean, like it was up against some stiff competition, and I will say to kind of lean into more of the film itself and less of the production. I don't know that I like the middle of this movie, and a lot of it has to do with like it's fast and furious names of places, and they're going like things just seem to happen constantly in this movie, and it's not like I mentioned up front. Look, it's act one of a 3-act structure here
hmm
for this entire film. And I kept looking at it and I'm going like, man, they're not doing any of the stuff I see in movies that I like, which is a lot of foreshadowing, right? And a lot of character building and like put me in this place, but give me like the meaty dialogue between characters, those slower
hmm
scenes to kind of ground me in their narrative. You don't see a lot of that. You get it up front with the Hobbits, right? And I think
Yeah.
those are the best serviced characters in this entire movie. It's like
Sure.
Bilbo, Frodo, Sam, Gandalf. Those are kind of the main ones that I think they do a good job servicing. The rest of them, I
hmm
think, almost feel like throwaway characters to me. A Boromir, Aragorn, like all the elves, they're just kind
Boromir,
of
literally.
yeah. Boromir he gets thrown away by the end of the movie, but to me, like they don't do a lot of the foreshadowing that I expect of good films, and kind of the callbacks and the cyclical, thematic stuff. And then I remember, oh shit, this is Act One, right? This is all
Right.
introduction, and so it could be everything I'm seeing is foreshadowing. We just never get to the part that we never get to the shadow part of it, right? Like
Yeah.
it's all
Yeah.
four.
Yeah. I mean, because, like, you're right. First of all, in the middle of this movie being kind of a drag mirrors the book experience because I remember the first time I got through Lord of the Rings, I got to the Council of Elrond and I almost gave up. Like, what is this? 90 pages of dudes
Oh
singing
yeah,
songs at tables and talking about their fathers. I don't even know. Like, and also, like, none of the main characters, like, Frodo's like, got to be sitting here, like, the fuck is they talking about?
yeah.
It's just like, 6-page poems and shit like that, and languages that you don't even understand. Like, they just start talking Elvish.
Yeah.
And I almost like as a 13-year-old, like the fuck is this? I pushed through, but like, and Jackson talks about that in the commentary. It's like, the Council of Elrond is just rough.
Yeah.
How do the film has finally managed to build a head of steam out of this birthday party.
Mhm.
And you've had this like compelling action and like this plot's really humming, and then the Council of Elrond, boom. And what do you do? And his thing is like, get us out of here as quick as possible. And there's the expanded edition has a lot of stuff around this, and it's funny when you hear about like, I want these quiet kind of meaty dialogues with Aragorn. It's there, it's even filmed, it's just all got cut.
Yeah.
Because Peter Jackson had his philosophy of, there's so much great material in this book, we can only keep the stuff that's doing at least double duty. If there's a quiet Aragorn scene, we can keep it if it says something about Boromir's character or establishes the stakes or points us into the next place we got to go. But if just Aragorn like building his character, it's got to get out of there because we don't have time to do that. So I don't know, because another thing is like, I want to talk about heretical opinions on things because John, Dr. John had the like, well, actually the movies are better than the books. I would agree with like, so the books are like 6 books long, and the first book is very much The Hobbit. Like, and you kind of get that in the film. Like, it's just a birthday party and it's hobbits drinking and having a good time, and Gandalf is enjoying stuff, and then things kind of take a sinister turn. But it takes a long time for the books to get out of that like Hobbit mode, and then they go into the Council of Elrond. So like the first half of the book is not what I would call great. Now, I would think that from there on, the books are amazing. They don't really like ever kind of like flag in quality. And there's some things I think that the books still do better. But my opinion is, I think the extended editions are worse movies than the theatrical releases.
Oh
Now,
boy.
I don't. Now, I'm not saying they're bad, because as a Lord of the Rings fan, I love all of that. I love all the extended stuff. I love all the additional detail, but they wreck the pacing of the films. Like, adding another full hour almost to this does affect the pacing, and the places where the film already has pacing problems, like more Council of Elrond stuff, more, Aragorn making moon eyes at Arwen, and him having his father, Arwen's father, coming and bitching him out about it and stuff like that.
It wasn't the pacing that I really had a problem with. I think it's almost has like a frantic pace to it. Most of the runtime, and it's a long runtime. It was really just like everything that is moving swiftly along, but everything felt truncated because of that. Like I expected more of that scene, or I expected to get more detail on this thing, but here we are, and we're on boats now, and we're headed out of the elf village.
Right.
Okay, I guess I'm not going to get any more of that. Buckle in for orcs. I didn't have a huge problem with like it not moving or dragging anywhere. It's just, and I guess the pacing problems can go the other way, right? Like
yeah.
Oh, it's too quickly paced.
Sure.
So yeah, I maybe should have watched the extended version, but I don't know if that would have left me feeling like, okay, well now it's too slow, or it just doesn't connect the way I wanted it to.
Well, if you did, I'd love to hear your opinion on it, because like that's my there's some of these things I think you will get that you'll like more of, but there's some things that I think it'll feel like it drags a bit. But again, so when I say it's like a better, the theatrical versions are better films, I mean that like they're better structural films. It's not that I hate all because as a Lord of the Ring fan, I don't mind when things just slow down and we get to see more of the stuff. I think there's a point, because I found that point in the fucking Hobbit, where it's like, holy shit, I'm tired of this shit. Can we just get moving on? But no, I prefer, if I'm just sitting down and watching the movies, I watch the extended editions. But I definitely think, and I'll even as we go through scene by scene, I actually made notes about what I thought was better and worse. So I think let's start at the beginning, the prologue. One thing that I guess I've forgotten, because I've heard all these before, is Peter Jackson talked about how the studio kind of had to fight him to put the prologue in, because he's like, oh god, this prologue going to be just 10 minutes of shit that nobody cares about and all that kind of stuff. But then when they said, no, this thing needs a prologue, you can't just start off at the birthday party, he kind of warmed up to the idea, and in retrospect, he says it serves like a James Bond introduction, that it's this clear, like you come into the movie and James Bond always hits you with an action scene. So like, hey, if you're just at the mall, or you just ate pizza for lunch, or you're worried about your job, after 10 minutes of the James Bond, you're not going to forget, you're not going to remember that shit, because now you're watching a James Bond film, and the film can then slow down and do other things. And this, quite impressive medieval fantasy battle that they opened up with, like, this feels important. You got this Kate Blanchett speaking Elvish and talking about magic rings, and you're like, okay, what is all this stuff? But then they hit you, bam, here's the first War of the Ring. Here's this guy, this, and it looks like things are cool, but then this dude comes out and starts swatting 100 people at a time, and the fingers get cut off, and it also does something I think is smart, which it establishes the ring as a character unto itself.
Yeah, that was the thing that shocked me on this rewatch, is how much the ring does feel like a character. Like, it's got a will.
And a lot of that comes from the prologue, because it gets you, the fact that the ring decided to do this, or the ring sensed its master, and the ring was able to do this, and the ring corrupts, like, and the rest of the movie, in fact, the rest of the trilogy, shot to where the ring is a character. It has weight, it has presence, it has a will that it wants to do. It tries to corrupt and deceive. It tries to be found at all times, and that all comes, that tone is all kind of set in the prologue here.
It's an interesting dynamic, because when you're seeing like the ring rates going around, it's easy to think, okay, well, they can sense where the ring is and they're following it to it, but it's more the opposite, right? The ring is calling them toward it. I don't know. It's a different inverse feel from what I'm used to in a film.
Do you think that Sauron works as a big bad in the prequel? Because like in most of the films from this point on, he's just a giant flaming eyeball.
Yeah, like I never got that. Like I still don't get that. I don't get that he's like the eye. There's some mysterious power he has over Saruman. Is that the the Christopher
White
Lee
Wizard.
character? Yeah, I still, it's very confusing to me. Very.
And it is, I think, to be fair, I think it is kind of silly that you got this big bad guy and his power is using a mace to sweep 20 dudes off his feet with a stroke, you know, but he's also vulnerable to having his finger cut off by a broken sword that also instantly self-destructs his entire realm when that happens. It's silly, but kind of like at a Death Star's got a tunnel that you can hit with a photon torpedo and blow up the whole shebang kind of way. But I'm amazed that no one ever talks, like, this is something I actually thought about, but no one ever talks about like Sauron feeling like a lightweight villain, because it's a psychological thing. It's like Sauron in these movies has not quite yet come to his full power. They're trying desperately to keep that from happening. And crucially, he doesn't have his Death Star yet, right? So it's more of a seduction, psychological, stalking thriller, kind of mental and emotional abuse tale than what you're used to, which is like Darth Vader, direct conflict, Force lightning against Force lightning. And it's much more mental and psychological. Yet most people, I don't think, walk away from these movies thinking that Sauron's a shitty character. It's just the movie kind of wills you into thinking he's a threat, because what you see on the screen is just not quite enough to establish. He doesn't hurt anyone that we care about, really. He kills some old dude's grandpa and then fails to step on another dude.
And a lot of that is done in the prologue, like you said. It's the description of the forging of the ring, I think, right? Like what they put, what qualities it has about like man's, quest for power and all that stuff is all of the worst qualities of a villain are wrapped up into this ring. And I was confused by that too, because Sauron is the eye, but Sauron is also the ring. There's a line in there where something about like his essence is part of this ring or trapped in this ring, or
he used a lot of his personal power to put in, like, because there's a lot of mythology, because Sauron's actually a fallen angel, kind of. He's not a man or anything like that. Okay. He put a lot of his godly power into the forging of this ring, which there's two things. It's kind of like J.R. Rowling rips a lot of this off in Harry Potter, but like he's very powerful, yes. And he can't be killed because he's got this powerful thing that, like, if he dies, it'll continually regenerate him. But it's also his, this mortal weakness. If you can ever find a way to kill this thing, but that's the other thing psychologically, anyone holding the ring, the last thing you want to do is destroy it. You want to put it on and you want to wield the power to do good. And then that's the brilliant thing of it. It starts corrupting you. And then you become either this weak, wretched creature that Sauron will take over, or you become the new Dark Lord. Like very much hints that if like Gandalf or Galadriel puts on the ring, they'll kick Sauron's ass for sure. But you will rue the day that the beautiful, terrible Galadriel becomes the Dark Queen of Middle Earth. It's like the devil you don't know. And I think all that stuff works, even if you don't know the deep lore.
It was a little confusing to me because, so what is the Eye of Sauron? What the hell is that thing?
Okay, so like when Sauron's physical body is destroyed in the prologue, it takes him a literal eon to amass his energy back, and he can't physically manifest a body. He probably would have. Once he gets the ring back, he would turn back into giant Sauron mode. But all he is this spirit, this baleful spirit that is... I don't think you're supposed to understand there's literally a ball of fire in the books at the top of the Dark Tower. But he's just this spirit that's in that's inhabiting and collecting and all the power and getting his lieutenants together. That's kind of helping him regenerate. In the movie, they just make it literal. Like, no, there's actually a ball of fire. Like, the CN tower, broadcasting this stuff out.
Not the same tower where Saruman.
No, there's two towers, as they'll explain in the second movie.
I assume.
But yeah, no, I was listening to the director's commentary, and he mentions that they went through tons of different versions of this prologue. What do we leave? And one of the final decisions is who does the voiceover. And at first they said it's well, you know, the lore behind this book is Frodo's writing these stories. Like Bilbo started this journey, this diary of his tales, and Frodo's writing. It's like by Frodo's own hand the account of this. And the shtick was that J.R.R. Tolkien recovered this ancient writing and translated it into modern tongue, and it's, you know,
it's a found footage series of novels.
Exactly. But they're like, well, we'll have Frodo because it's his story. But it's like, well, it doesn't really work because who the hell is even Frodo? And then they had Sir Ian McKellen do it as Gandalf, and they're like, whoa, this is really powerful. It's working. But then they had Cate Blanchett try it as Galadriel, and they really liked this kind of like timeless, elfish quality she brought to the vocal performance. And, you know, also out of that, I think she's older than Gandalf, or at least his manifestation of Middle Earth too. She's like one of the oldest, you know, physical beings in Middle Earth at this point.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for the elves to be sort of keepers of knowledge, you know, since they live as forever. Can live forever?
They can, they can live forever until they get, like, their stick is they can live forever until they're too wary of Middle Earth, and then they can go across the sea and live in this paradise island.
Retirement home. Florida.
And that's the thing, like the story of the elves are very, very powerful, but they're also just tired. They're wary of like at this point, most of the elves have gone west and sailed across and gone to elf heaven, and the few that remain are there because of long-term loyalty to people, and they're just trying to kind of hang things on and like hoping that because man is a second creation, like they're a race that came that God created after the elves, and they have the gift of men, which is mortality. Like men are these, you know, as opposed to elves who just get worn the fuck out.
On the other side of the mortality fence, huh?
Well, and there's big plots of in the Silmarillion is essentially the powerful men being like, this is bullshit. We fucking die. We're coming across the waves and we're taking immortality for ourselves, and that goes about as well as you think.
Okay.
But no, I think that's like the Galadriel starting this off. You don't even know who the hell Galadriel is, but then when you, I just think it just works, and I love Cate Blanchett's this stuff, and by far, like this movie, I don't even know how things work without the prologue, because this 10 minutes of heavy going gives you an exclamation mark to begin the movie, and also they constantly refer to it. Like they have this scene where Gandalf is talking to the Elrond and why he doesn't trust men. And, you know, a scene where they'd have to establish all this shit becomes just like a 5-10 second flashback of the Crack of Doom. And it works because they did all the heavy lifting in the prologue.
Yeah. And he can be like, I was there, you know, I saw the evil, like that kind of thing. And your mind goes back to that scene.
Yeah. And think about how many conversations about the ring Gandalf has with Frodo that would be much heavier going if you didn't know what the ring was and its qualities and who made it and all that kind of stuff. So the prologue does a lot of heavy lifting up front. Then we go to Hobbiton, and here's my big problem with the extended edition. There's a lot of extra Hobbit shit in this, but universally it makes the Hobbits seem on balance like they're dumb assholes. You know?
Okay.
Like they're just like picking their ears and eating their earwax, and they're doing things backwards and weird, and you know, and I think that's like it's like a 60-40 dumbass to shrewd mixture. And I think it should be like 20-80. Like, yes, hobbits are kind of backwards and they have their weird ways, but they're also like resourceful and hardworking and perceptive for, you know, they have a lot of common sense. And the introduction, like seeing that old pinched face hobbit, that Proudfoot guy, you know, like with his scowl is like this Gandalf. He's always got new ideas, and he's coming in and he's doing this stuff. And then him going to kind of like, you know, laughing along at the children being amazed at his fireworks. And that's the perfect introduction to hobbits. The wedding feast where, yeah, they're doing a bunch of dumb asshole stuff, but they're also super drunk and having a good time. Like, all the extra Hobbit stuff just makes the Hobbit seem dumber and less impressive, and I don't think that's what the movie intends. Certainly not how Tolkien felt about him.
If you're a Deep Space Nine fan, it's like Rom versus Quark, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like one of them is incredibly dumb. You don't know how he functions, and the other one is like, you know, kind of an idiot, but also very shrewd.
Right, exactly. But I don't know. I like this Hobbiton stuff is a great introduction to the Hobbits and why they are. That's a wonderful introduction to Gandalf, because Gandalf is a tricky dude. He's this immensely powerful master manipulator, but he also has just a ton of warmth, and a lot. Frodo giving him the hug, like I love his performance on the wagon, where like he stones these kids wanting to see his fireworks, and like rides past and he gives them just a little taste, and his like reaction, like woo, that's a good one. Like he just ripped a really good fart and everybody's laughing at it. Gandalf dancing with the hobbits. His little demented chuckle as he goes back to his tent to get they're gonna wait till they see this fucking thing. Ian McKellen he's just fucking Gandalf. I don't know how to say it, because it's very hard to get that godlike being that's also approachable to not just children but Hobbit children.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like he was, half grandfather, half, amazing sorcerer. And the other character introduction I think they do a great job with is Bilbo. I feel like Bilbo is a real character with a history that is only vaguely filled in here. He's an adventurer of some kind. He's got a book that he's been wanting to write for years.
All these things very unusual. Put it off. Yeah, all these things very unusual for hobbits, right? You get that.
Well, yeah, so I have minor complaints about like them saying, "Oh, I'm 111." I don't know what that means in Hobbit terms. Like that could be totally normal, or that could be, my God, they only live to 10 typically. I have no idea.
Right.
So, a little more color on that would have been nice. But, like, they do a great job with what they can put on screen here in the amount of time they have. And I feel like Bilbo is one of the most fleshed-in characters of all of them.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to this scene and, like, a scene later on. Like, it's just this party, and then when he meets them in Rivendell, those are the two times we see Bilbo, and I think both of them are very effective.
Yeah, and you can kind of they hint, because you think that Bilbo's a really cool dude. Like the scene where him and Gandalf are smoking, I think is amazing, because it gives you a first taste of like, it's pretty mundane, but Gandalf blowing that smoke galleon is pretty fucking righteous. Like Toby. I can blow a smoke ring, but look what this guy's doing. And, him being like at ease with this relation, like Gandalf and Bilbo being at ease, sets up their confrontation later on where Bilbo, for some reason, can't give up this ring. And it's kind of scaring Gandalf,
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, like you talked about the double, triple, quadruple duty that these scenes need to do. I think they do it so well in this early going, because it's not only setting up Bilbo as a character, but it's setting up the ring as a character and the properties, the effect that the ring has on the people who possess it. And it's doing that so efficiently. It's telling us enough about the character, but also more about the ring.
Yeah, and like as they're establishing Gandalf enjoying making children laugh and dancing with hobbits, they also they introduce Merry and Pippin as being these mischievous guys who don't necessarily think before they act, and they're kind of decidedly unhobbitish and kind of getting in trouble. This stuff is just, I think it just all works really great. And that scene between Bilbo and Gandalf, where Gandalf has to, and Bilbo's like, "Well, you just want to steal my ring," and Bilbo Baggins, that stuff could very easily be parody, right? Like if you have an actor who's not taking this seriously, and also Ian Holm, holy shit.
Fantastic.
Like when he does that, like I almost think it's overkill to turn him into a goblin face in Rivendell, because he's so good at like making his eyes bulge out and giving that kind of like, oh, this is early stage Golem that he's catching. Early stage Gollum, rather. I don't know why I keep on saying Golem. Or early stage Gollum with this guy. Like when he like lights his eyes up and says and he's stroking and says "my precious," his eyes look like they go slitted like a reptile, but there's no practical effects there. He's just acting maniacal, like the ring is getting domination over him.
Yeah,
and it's just great. I think, like I already said, this is the scene that kind of like relaxed me as a Tolkien fan, that like they're going to get this. But really, like I could even go back to like when Gandalf knocks on Bag End, and I'd read so many descriptions about what it looked like, and it's also something that a lot of like Tolkien artists like to illustrate. And they knock it out of the park. You can still go to New Zealand today and tour Hobbiton. The whole human scale set is all there. They keep it maintained and stuff because it's great for tourism. But it's a real place. It looks real. I guess Peter Jackson revealed in the commentary that he's got this set stored away in his personal belongings, the entire human-sized bag-in set, because he wants to build it before he dies. He wants to actually live there, because it's such a comfortable, like, cool, like, womb-like place, he said, the circular walls and whatnot. But the fact that everything of this is built in 2 scales, human scale, Hobbit scale. He also said that I intentionally did a lot of flashy special effects work up front. Like, there's a scene where, again, this is 20 years ago, Gandalf on the human size set hands his hat and staff to Bilbo on the Hobbit set, and that shit looks real. Like, I can kind of see the compositing on a really good 4K television with the Blu-ray.
Sure.
But it's really, really good. And another thing I learned is when Ian smacked his head, that was not scripted. He organically smacked his head, and Ian McKellen, being the actor he is, had the instinct to just, I'm gonna stay in Gandalf. Like, that's what, Gandalf would smack his head on this. And they put it in the movie, the organic take of him smacking his head.
Nice.
I love that. And did you get that, like, Gandalf doesn't know what the ring is at this point. He's got his suspicions based on what Bilbo does with it and how Bilbo's acting towards it, but he doesn't know that this is the One Ring. And
and then he goes and he does all the reading on it, right, and realizes, oh, that's the ring.
And they really sell that because
and tests it with the fire.
And when he comes back, like, he's dirty. He's got, like, mud on his, like, he's, like, done, like, really fast writing over a bunch of crap and gone here, there, and done all this research. His hair's all out of whack and all that kind of stuff. I love how they make Gandalf seem like he's been lived in from the first time you meet him till when he comes back all desperate to figure stuff out. And I love how they sell that initial inkling of suspicion where he looks at the ring on the floor and he, by the way, they use a ton. Oh shit. I'm getting too digressive. I'm like 3 digressions deep now. I'm going to hit limbo. He goes to bend down and he just barely touches it, and they hit you with that ring of fire, right? And it's like, oh, and my God, what could terrify Gandalf?
Yeah.
But I was going to say, they use a lot of techniques to make the ring seem supernaturally heavy and impressive. Like when Bilbo drops it on the ground, it lands and just doesn't bounce because they've had a powerful magnet under the floor. And this is like a very heavy steel ring, and it just hits and doesn't bounce. I just think stuff like that is really fucking cool. Another tidbit that I learned from the commentary is later on when there's a scene where the ring is in extreme foreground on this mountain pass, and Boromir picks it up and talks a mess about, so strange that this tiny thing holds the fate of us all. That ring is like 8 inches wide on this massive gold chain, because it's the only way they could get the extreme shot of Frodo and Aragorn in the background and all that stuff to work and read against this brilliant white ground and brilliant blue sky. Like, no, everything else looked blurry or out of focus. So it just made the ring huge.
Man, it sounds like this film is just a nightmare for effects production, but also like super fun. I gotta imagine like figuring that stuff out was a blast.
And I also, someone in this world has this giant Flavor Flav style ring. And like that, I tried to just like, is there like a picture of Peter Jackson, a rap party wearing that thing? Because like, how awesome would that be? To have this massive, dinner plate size, the One Ring that you're wearing, like some massive Middle Earth pimp. The one thing that stood out, and I never noticed before, Elijah Wood's poor fingernails. He just chews those two, like he's got no fingernails at all, man. His poor. Are you a chewer?
I feel his pain. Yeah, I got similar no fingernail thing going on.
Does that hurt? Do your fingernails hurt all the time?
They can if you chew them down too far, but I don't.
Oh, man,
I've come to a balance.
Okay, because I was wondering, because they looked like red and swollen, and I was like, every time they're in frame, I'm like, oh my God, this poor guy. This film must really took it out of him. But I go ahead. Yeah, jump in, please.
I was gonna say, so the next thing that happens, right, is they head over to Bree. Like, the ring wraiths get wind of it. Like, Gandalf comes back and says, "Hey, you got the ring. Go to Bree. I'll meet you there." And he gets hung up. He goes out to Saruman to try and like consult with him, and turns out Saruman's infested by Sauron. and he's doing his bidding. And then there's this old man stick fight, which I think is fucking hilarious. I think this is hallmark Peter Jackson. If you've ever seen any of his older stuff, this like half slapstick kind of fight, it's reminiscent of Brain Dead, Dead Alive, whatever you want to call it. That kind of vibe to it, right? It almost feels like this amateur production, this amateur scene in a fully mainstream high budget film. It looks stupid to me, but like in that Peter Jackson way that I really kind of love.
I have in my notes that it's two old men engaging in a high stakes I've fallen and I can't get up fight.
Yeah. Like, the way they're just like pushing each other over.
Battle to the first broken hip, you know.
Yeah,
but
it's
also
so dumb.
That's one of those things where I think it's cool because I guess I was expecting some like giant wizard duel with fireballs and shit. And
like Willow. I thought Willow actually has a better wizard fight scene in it than this movie does.
But it works in kind of like because I guess in magic and especially in Tolkien, it's not so much about like the physical manifestation of power as it is like you understand that when Saruman and Gandalf are fighting, it's as much on the spiritual plane. You know, it's a battle of will and power as much as it is, you know, some ninja staff kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it still feels like a moment when Saruman gets both of those staffs and it's like, oh man, Gandalf's ass is grass now.
Yeah.
But before we go to that, I want to go back and this other thing where the prologue shines so well is when Gandalf goes and tells Frodo about all this stuff. And I also think they did a good job of establishing, there's a lot of questions I think a reasonable person would ask, like, well, why doesn't Gandalf just take this fucking ring if it's the ultimate power, right? And they do a good job of showing like what a bad idea that would be in so many words. I love the brief relief Gandalf feels when he thinks it's not the One Ring. Because it's in the fire and like there's no words and he's like, oh, thank God. And then the words appear.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And I think it also just speed things up, you know, because it takes a while to go from the birthday party to like Frodo hitting the road. And there's a whole lot of preparation and stuff in the books where this is just like go.
Okay. I was going to say, I didn't remember it taking very long, but yeah, the books maybe.
No, it moves on. And I also just love like the introduction of Sam. Sean Astin is just such a great job because like he is the kind of not dim-witted, but you know, he's not super curious. He doesn't read books. He loves the land. He loves working with plants and animals. But he's a good friend.
He's no Pip, right? Pip is the dumbass of the group, in my opinion.
No, he's not foolish, but like I love Gandalf's face when he's fucking with Sam. It's like, oh, please don't turn me into something unnatural. And he's like, no. And also Frodo being in on the joke, like, Gandalf's not going to turn you into a newt, you dumbass. But he is going to psychologically bullying you into being Frodo's bodyguard. Have you seen, this came out a couple weeks ago, there's someone made a supercut of this film where every time Sam takes a step, they cut the scene of him saying, that's it, one more step, and I'll be further from home than I've ever been before. And it's like a 12-hour cut of this movie.
That's ridiculous. I love it.
I do love the attention to detail. But I just think Christopher Lee wanted to be Gandalf. He lobbied really hard because he, and I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, he could have been. I think he's too old for that now, but he's so good at being the formerly righteous, now twisted and evil version of Saruman. Because you can see it. You can see him being this impressive figure in like a Council of Elrond situation in his gleaming white robes and his craggy face with that kind of hook nose and all that stuff. He looks like a fucking wizard.
Yeah, I'm trying to picture him as Gandalf. I don't think of Christopher Lee as a particularly warm presence in his films. And granted, I haven't seen very many of them. I'm sure there's plenty of his work where he is. But I think of him more as a Saruman than a Gandalf, for sure.
But there's then when they're on the way, they're the first appearance of the ring wraith. They do that, what they call the Hitchcock shot, which is such a simple effect, but when they're looking down the road and like Elijah senses something evil's coming, and the way they get that effect where it feels like things are getting bigger and smaller at the same time is they pull the camera back on a dolly at the same time physically pushing the camera lens to zoom. And I still don't know how that works, makes the light bend in the but it is like this cheap but very effective, like something is wrong here. And the bugs boiling out of the ground, I thought was a cool, like, trying to get away from this evil presence. It does a lot to establish these writers as terrifying, presences. And I still think they work. They're like one of the all-time best villains of cinematic history.
Yeah, it works until Aragorn kicks like 5 of their asses, burns one, and spanks them back home to their mommies. Like, they don't seem Aragorn very impressive cool. Then.
That just makes Aragorn look that much cooler.
Sure. That's fair.
But they also established the Hobbits of being like, even Pip and Merry here. They don't know what the hell's going on. They should be terrified of these guys, but you know what? Frodo needs their help, and they're going to give it to him. We get to the Prancing Pony, and here's where a lot of the other like techniques, where if you look for this, you'll see it all the time. But a lot of the people walking past Frodo are on stilts with like prosthetic hands and stuff.
Oh, jeez.
And you'll never notice that until you start looking for it. But once you do, you can't unsee. Like, everybody in the background is just lumbering around in these giant stilts, and there's like foam rubber hands swinging into place. And
wow.
But I think Aragorn's introduction, where he's in that corner in the dark and like his eyes blaze with his tobacco pipe, is one of the most badass introductions in all cinematic history. And it works really good, and also continues the theme of how damn brave these hobbits are. Because this guy snatches up their boy, and 30 seconds later, Merry, Sam, and Pip are in there wanting to throw down with this dude who would just thrash them. It's great. And the 9 coming in to the Prancing Pony and fucking shit up and screaming, great scene. That especially the one that really gives me chills is when they're all kind of gliding past the barkeep who's weeping on the other side, just desperate not to be seen. Man, it gives me chills.
Wait,
just thinking about it.
You call them the 9? I thought the 9 was the group of people who are escorting the ring.
It is. It's both. It's the 9 were kind of like, I think Elrond makes a passing reference to like how fitting it is that you've got 9 companions against the 9. Mortal men who are given these rings have corrupted them into these wraiths.
Equal and opposite sort of thing.
Yeah. But like, there's so much stuff like on the road to Weathertop, where there's the famous second breakfast thing establishing while they're game and they're brave, they really did not know what they're getting into. The fact that they are hiding out and setting this fire on this raised, exposed thing. Even Frodo knows that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
But just like these little things where it's like, these guys will grow into very impressive warriors by the end of this, but they start off as just dumbasses, that don't think about anything before they do it. And this was, you mentioned that Viggo Mortensen comes and fucks these wraiths up. That's his literal first day filming. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
He had never held a sword before in his life. And the stunt coordinators, like, he flew into New Zealand, like, look, I got 24 hours to get you some basic moves. And it is like a pretty basic sword fight. But I think it's like pretty, like Viggo Mortensen.
Really, he's just he's spinning around swinging a sword and a torch, right? Like, he's not doing much of anything.
I thought they did, from storytelling, I thought they did a good job showing that, like, this is all he can do to keep these guys at bay.
Yeah.
Like, he's like stumbling, he's like making desperate swings, he's using fire, he's using his, plus he's, do you get to, like, Aragorn is also like a special dude? He's got like magic blood.
No, no.
Okay.
I mean, I get nothing from Boromir. I get nothing from Aragorn. I get nothing from most of the elves. It's like they're characters who are there for later movies, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's like I guess to modernize, that's the little bit problematic aspect of Tolkien's work, is he does have this kind of some people are just better than you. It doesn't mean you can't be a hero, because Frodo's not special at all. He's just common dirt. But Aragorn, he's just going to be flat out better. He's humble about it. He'll bow down to you, but he's got magic blood and you don't. So sucks to be you, lesser hobbits.
No, I didn't get the magic blood thing, but I definitely was getting like a Han Solo chasing the stormtroopers down the hall screaming kind of vibe from that fight with Aragorn. It's like, this is desperation. This shouldn't work, and it's only by sheer force of will and fury that it does.
And also the fact that the hobbits bought him just a little bit of time, and the fact that the ring wraiths are there to steal the ring and not just kill everybody. There's a lot of, I think, interesting things that they're doing to make it, but also, yeah, like, because Viggo Mortensen, can't remember the guy that replaced him, but like they hired this younger guy, and Peter Jackson's just like, this guy's not pulling it off. He's not getting the gravitas. We need somebody, and they replaced him at the literal last minute after they'd already filmed a little bit with Aragorn. I wonder what that guy feels like, that he got replaced and this went on to become like the biggest film of a generation.
Yeah, I don't
like
know.
Imagine if you're Luke Skywalker and, you know, like 6 days into shooting, it's like, this guy's not working. Get Mark Hamill in here. Like, man, the what if.
I saw a headline that maybe Jake Gyllenhaal was considered for Frodo.
It's somebody. I want to say it's the dude that was in that vampire movie with Aaliyah.
Oh God, the Damned, something the Damned.
Yeah, Queen of the Damned.
Queen of the Damned.
I think it's somebody, but it's a much younger guy who's not Viggo Mortensen. I'd only seen Viggo.
Stapp looking fucker.
might be.
I don't know.
It might be. But yeah, I think that's one of the kind of the great, you know, what ifs, because Viggo, I can't imagine anybody else being him at this point.
Yeah.
But they also changed, like, so the person that comes and rescues Frodo and takes him across a river was supposed to be this other unnamed, you know, he's not an unnamed Glorfindel in the books, but they changed it to Arwen, which I thought was smart, because the other big criticism from these films is there's not enough women, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you're a young teenage girl and you want to see yourself in this world, you have Eowyn in the second and third films, who has pretty badass role, but there's not a lot of characters, and giving Arwen some of these action shots. And I think like her horse chase is like one of the more exciting things in the movie. There's, especially if you're a big fan, there's this point where she speaks Elvish to her horse, where she's encouraging it to go faster. And I swear to God, this horse puts in a performance. Like, it's like, hell yeah, Arwen, I got some more in reserve. And he like really digs in his hoof and goes faster. It's one of those scenes where it's like, you know, when Vin Diesel flips on the afterburners in Fast and Furious. Like, I don't know how, but the horse emotes that he's trying to go faster, and it's a great scene. It's one of the favorite things I like to look for.
One of the best things that they do in this movie is tied up in this scene. During the entire film, the Nazgul are up their ass. Like, there is never a moment where I feel like, okay, they've hit a point of safety, they can settle down and really like catch their breath. The Nazgul are up their ass this entire movie.
Yeah. Like, there's a brief respite at Rivendell where the power of the elves can repulse them, and also I think.
But you know they got to leave that eventually, right? Like, that's the thing. The Nazgul are out there waiting.
Because if they stay there. Eventually, Sauron will reconstitute, and he'll come down with all of the armies and burn this place to the ground. Yeah. So it's a refuge, but it's not safety.
There's a ticking timer, you know, with the orc army that he's building, the orc goblin army. Yeah, they do a good job of making it feel extremely urgent that they get on with this fucking quest.
Do you think that, because like one of the big reasons that Tolkien wrote this book is his experiences with World War I and seeing the Industrial Revolution destroying the English countryside. Do you think, and that's one of the major themes, like mechanized warfare and how inhuman it is. And I thought, if you know that theme going in there's a lot of good stuff where like Saruman is just callously, you know, rip the trees down, the root, you know, and they're turning it into steel, and they've got these birthing chambers of the Uruk-hai. Did you get that? Like, of course, you know.
No,
that's a shame.
But now that you say it, I see a little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they cut out the entire part of the books because the Lord of the Rings and the books ends with the hobbits coming back to Hobbiton with no one to help them, but there's still a remnants of Saruman's like slave labor empire, and they've turned Hobbiton into this nightmare, and they have to personally run them off just with their own skills and ability that they've gotten from, you know, fighting in the War of the Ring, and they really explicitly make it that. You know, like how bad these working in factories are, and you take these simple folk and you take away their land, you poison their river, and what have they got left? But I thought they did a little bit. If you're a Tolkien fan, you kind of see that in the margins here of that work. But yeah, you get to Rivendell and you got the Council of Elrond, and the plot just slams to a halt. And in the books, it's 10 times worse. But I don't know. I think they efficiently introduced like Boromir and set him in somewhat opposition to Aragorn. I don't think it makes sense if you don't know the book plot, but you get that there's a little bit of beef, you know. And also Aragorn, like, he's dressed up and he's wearing fancy clothes, and just the way he carries himself among the elves kind of sets him apart from Boromir. Boromir fumbling this artifact that's in their shared history, but he's too blustery to give it its appropriate respect. I think all that stuff is good. And man, Liv Tyler to me is like the top 3 all-time most beautiful fictional characters as Arwen. Like, something about her just glows in these movies, and
well, everything is glowing. Like,
yeah, but like, I remember back in the day, some movie reviewer described her as having a certain bovine beauty, and I wanted to fight them. Like, I got so angry at them besmirching my lady's honor that I wanted to go and fucking fight them.
Bovine beauty.
Yeah, what, cow-like? What is cow-like about? See,
and what is beautiful about cows? Okay, sure.
It's just some guy talking shit. Talking shit. He wouldn't do that if Aragorn is in the room. Anyway,
I
Peter
love
Jackson,
the birthing stuff that you were talking about, the birthing chamber of the Uruk-hai. Like, that shit is real gross, A, which I like to see, and B, it's a real good introduction to the leader of that warrior race. I don't know. They make it pretty clear that it's a hybrid, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know if Uruk-hai was the name of the particular, if it was the name of the species that he's creating, the warrior race, or if it's just that guy's name.
Yeah, you've got like the common orc, and then these are the Uruk-hai that he's perfected. But that's it, because that stuff's not in the book, the fact that they have a leader, but you need that. You need that, so you have the emotional climax of Aragorn whipping his ass in the final film, and make it a personal, Boromir's death personal. You've got, instead of just like, band of orcs, you got evil personified. I thought, and I think that's a smart adaptation too.
Yeah, just killing another orc goblin creature wouldn't have done it at the end of this movie.
Jackson mentioned that like this shoot for the Council of Elrond was a nightmare. It took him like 7 days of 18 hours shooting, and like how complicated it was to keep everyone's eye line and the camera moves, because so you don't cross the line and all that stuff, which I think was interesting. But it also, like, it's a nightmare in the book. Like, it takes 6 to 7 days to read to make it through if you're a 13-year-old.
Jesus.
But there's also a lot of, I thought, like, Jackson told Ian McKellen to play Gandalf when Frodo volunteers for the ring, as if like your son volunteered to go off to fight World War I, but you also know it's necessary for him to do so. And I'm like, well, shit, yeah, that's exactly what he's given. And I thought, like, it's just everything is moves once you get past that. Like, you got Ian Holmes given, one last chance, showing what fate will meet Frodo if he doesn't master the ring. The giving of the sting and the mithril vest I thought was really cool. I do think Bilbo's facial transformation is a bit much.
I agree.
It's certainly effective, and I about shit my pants the first time I saw it in the movie. But I feel like Ian Holm could just do that.
Yep.
But
I don't think it added, and I don't think it was warranted given what it added. I also really like when the Hobbits show up and volunteer for the quest along with Frodo. That whole scene is cute, and I like the cute stuff that the Hobbits are doing throughout this entire movie.
Yeah, it's important to their arc that they have to start this way, and also you could argue that they got into this thing blind on the road to Bree, but now they've been through all that stuff and they know the stakes, and they're still volunteering to go to this crack of fucking doom. Sounds, it's like, this is what happened to you in the Shire. Now you're going to go to this place called Mordor and throw the ring into the crack of doom at the height of all these evil people's power, and these little people are just volunteering for it. It's beautiful. It says something about the human spirit. On the way to Mordor, there's a lot of, like, again, like all these like heavy lifting scenes. They have like this comic scene of the Hobbits and Boromir kind of play fighting him, training them. But that sells the hobbits later kind of distinguish themselves a little bit in combat in this movie and a bunch in the rest. It also explains why Boromir would fight to the death for them and why the hobbits would be, so endeared that they'd try to defend him. Like, this is setting all this stuff up for the climax of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I could have sacrificed a lot of this stuff, a lot of the road trip monster, fight this monster, fight that monster, endure this hardship, that hardship, for a little bit more development of characters, a little more context for everything. It would have been my preference, but I acknowledge this is part one of a 3-part story.
And I just think that enough, I mean, I don't know, people say it plenty, but this movie is so beautiful because it really showcases New Zealand.
Yeah.
Like these shots in the mountain and when they're just like doing the, just randomly walking through fields and forests and stuff that, George Lucas would shoot that in a green screen and have a bunch of graphic artists gin up something. But holy hell, you can't beat these dudes in a real place. Like I even thought that like the place where they're hiding from the birds, that might be CG. But Peter Jackson said no, that like him and one of the helicopter guys were flying over on the way to another set, and this helicopter guy mentioned, I saw this really cool place in this mountain. It's got all these kind of like the Stonehenge like formation, and Jackson's like, yeah, let's buzz by it, and he's like, oh yeah, I want to take a picture of that. We'll come back here. I mean, New Zealand just got all. It is Middle Earth. It's got all this shit for free.
Yeah,
you just have to go out with a camera and film it.
They use it all, man. They go from the top of the earth. Way up in the sky, all the way down to the depths of the core. Like, it does add. I will say, like, yeah, I could have used less of that and more context, but also it adds to the epic feel of the whole thing, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff for like book fans. Like you probably don't notice, but Legolas, when he's walking through this waist deep snow, he actually glides along top.
I noticed.
Feet don't. Okay, because like that's something.
I assumed that was just like the elf ability, because like, I also know like from talking with you and all my other friends from that era, like they're the elves are like fleet of foot and very, they have the agility and acrobatic abilities, and from seeing future movies that hadn't come out yet, where he's like dancing on elephants and shit, I noticed that and I was like, oh, that's cool.
I think it's one of those things that's kind of in the margins, that it's such a nice touch. They don't go into like all the different magical abilities, but like the fact that these elves are like the Uruk-hai are these heavy, breaking stuff as they walk, and elves just like, they don't even bend blades of grass. They don't leave no mark on the land, and the land can't really do nothing natural can do anything to them. Like Legolas doesn't feel cold. The earth can't hurt him because they have this like special relationship with it. I think the shit that shit's really cool. I love Gandalf and Saruman's weather off, where they're chanting at each other, trying to undo each other's magic. Or I guess what they're doing is Saruman's trying to wake up this mountain spirit, and Gandalf's trying to put it back to sleep, which is from the books. But I love that. I love that scene. Christopher Lee at the top of Orthanc, just like conjuring up this wicked storm. It's so cool.
Here's the thing I couldn't help but notice during these traveling scenes. They're going across the countryside here, and I'm thinking back to the scene where, like, is it Arwen? Does that Liv Tyler?
Mm-hmm.
Arwen conjures a bunch of horses in the river and sweeps away the Nazgul that are coming after them. And I'm thinking of that, and I'm looking at this traveling group, and I'm seeing one fucking horse. One horse. It's literally, you couldn't conceive of a more important mission, a more important quest that they desperately need help for, and the elves send them off with a single fucking horse. Are you kidding me?
Not even a horse, a pony.
Oh,
a pony. God. You're right. And the Elrond had a stable of these famous immortal elfin horses.
Arwen's got one.
Just make them out of sea foam.
Jesus. I mean, she's riding one, right? She picks up...
That's true.
Well, maybe she gets that from someone. Maybe she gets that from Aragorn or somebody.
The elves have to have horses, right?
Absolutely. Gotta have horses.
If they got one, because I'm thinking like, well, maybe they're philosophically against riding, but nah, Arwen's riding one right there.
Yeah. And she's damn good at it too, so...
You mentioned that there's not a lot of foreshadowing, but there is a little bit here where they foreshadow how bad an idea the going through the mines of Moria are, and the Balrog, because like... Christopher Lee's like reading scripture up about it, and they're like he's taunting Gandalf from afar, and you're like, oh man, this looks fucking this looks like a bad idea. And also the fact that Gandalf just does not want to go, like
No,
he's
I
risking
liked
their
that.
life, and the fact that the rest of the 9 are like, you're insane, old man, for taking us this way, and he still knows that this is probably the better path if Frodo hadn't pushed out. But what do you think of the water? Because like Peter Jackson mentioned in the commentary that the Watcher in the Water, this big squid thing, he felt like at this point in the movie you needed a big monster scene. Because number one, it's cool that you have this big monster scene. The studio wanted to cut it out. They're like, no, we need a big monster fight here. And also, it commits the group. Because they go in here and they see like, oh shit, the dwarves are not only gone, but they've been brutally massacred with orc arrows. Oh my god, they go to leave and they can't. Yeah. Because the other thing is like, as everything gets worse and worse and worse in the mines, the natural thing is like, let's just go back and find another way. They can't. It's a one-way journey. And I think that Watcher in the Water is just one of the best, rubber movie monsters of all time, even though it's all digital.
Yeah, no, it was a cool scene. I think you absolutely needed to seal them to their fate, essentially. And I was noticing moments like that where they do it. They do stuff like that where I'm thinking, is this necessary? Like, why? I would just cut this whole fucking thing. Like those birds that come flying by, and I'm like, oh, why are they having a pack of birds come through? Who gives a shit? And then, they later reveal, oh, those are going actually to Saruman, and they're telling him where they're at. And so, okay, they did actually need those things.
And that actually might be why they don't have horses, because I know there is this thing that Saruman and Sauron have spies everywhere, and they're looking for like a big, like what Sauron would do in this situation is he would get all of his dudes together and he'd come and they'd kick ass in force. And he doesn't expect like this small kind of like minor detachment and like keeping it going along like dangerous paths and broken ground where maybe horses can't go. I mean, I'm apologizing for the film here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a giant bird that could have, carried them.
Yes,
there.
Famously, they could just gotten Gwahir or whatever, the Lord of the Eagles, and just finished it all. But but then what happens? That eagle gets ideas and decides to put that ring on its talon.
That's true. Unstoppable.
Then you've got the dark eagle lord that rules you all. It's taking your babies back to his roost for his foul brood to dismember and to tear apart like so many spring hairs. But this, some of the best scenes in this movie, the things that I have the ones that really resonated with me, especially watching this year, is where Gandalf gets lost, which, I think it's a great touch that Gandalf, as powerful as he is, he's still kind of human. But he has a great conversation with Frodo where Frodo's like, talking about like, I wish my uncle had killed, Gollum. And he's like, well, do you? Because, there's many that deserve death, but there's a lot of dead that deserve life. Can you give it to them? Like, don't be so quick to deal out death and judgment. And then Frodo turns to whining about, I wish none of this had ever happened. And Gandalf's like, everyone that lives through times like this wishes they weren't here, but that's not for us to decide. All we have to decide is how to use the time we have. And I'm like, I watched that early goings in this year, and I've thought back on it many times that like, no, this sucks. This fucking sucks. 2020 sucks. But what is bitching about it going to do? Like, what can you do to make things better? What can you do to strengthen your friends, your family, all that kind of stuff, yourself? I don't know. I don't know how well I'm applying that, but I felt like Kismet that I got that right as all this stuff started happening. And I think that's one of the great scenes between Frodo and Gandalf. You ready for some more Lord of the Rings heresy?
Yeah, bring it.
I think Moria sucks. Its design sucks. Like, this is supposed to be the
Agreed.
biggest, best dwarfen city, a marvel, a hall, something that like a dwarf would be like, they call this place a mine. Look, it's a fucking mine. It's
got
a fucking
fancy
mine.
columns. Big deal.
Go to any salt mine, it looks the same. Yeah, they got big ass. Like, I've been to one of these things. There's a place in Kentucky, like right outside of Louisville, where there's a giant salt mine. It looks just like it. Like these just infinite football fields with big load-bearing salt columns where they can't mine it all out or it collapses.
But were they carved with dwarven runes? That's the question. That's what makes it so fancy.
This place doesn't look like anyone ever lived there. And maybe they're going through the back roads or whatever. But I wanted to see like a glimpse of the great city.
Yep.
And it can be dour and gloomy because it's not lit, but I never got that. Actually, when they go, do you remember, was this in the theatrical, like when they go into the city of the dead in the third movie to recruit the army of the dead?
No,
that
remember.
Shit looks like what I think Moria should have looked like. A once great but decrepit underground necropolis now. And I don't feel like that. Like, Moria to me is actively working mines, abandoned mines, and one small inexplicable tomb where the dwarves took a last standout. Why here? I don't know. I always thought that the Moria's design sucks
also have
ass.
to take their stand. I don't know.
Yeah. Like,
no, I'm with you.
Be,
it's just a bunch of columns. I wasn't impressed.
It's dumb. Yeah, there should be shops and houses and playgrounds and all kinds of stuff. So hate it. I do like, there's not a lot of comedy in this film, especially as we go forward, but like I felt like the last ones is Pippin accidentally kicking that skull down the well and just like that's like the last time where you can make kind of like laugh along with everybody. You got that sigh of relief, and then the drums hit.
Yeah.
And then like the movie takes a brief pause in Lothlorien, and then it's a sprint from the rest of the film.
I do like the moment of comedy when they're headed down the stairs, and they're trying to jump this gap, and Gimli, it's like nobody throws a dwarf, and also
not
when he does jump, not the beard. Yeah, it's good. I liked it.
I forgot. You're right. There are a couple more ha-has. But I do think that, like, my problems with Moria's design aside, this is a spectacular fight. Like, this thing that happens in the burial tomb of Balin, or I think it's that who it is.
With the cave troll.
Yeah, and you got Sting glowing. And even Gandalf is kicking ass with his sword Glamdring and his staff, and he's spinning around doing shit. And like everyone kind of gets their own, like Sam's whopping guys with his cast iron pans. That introduce the Mithril. Like everyone gets these moments of like badass. They really establish early going Legolas, because we heard you heard how kick ass the elves are, but like we don't really see it, and how much like one Legolas is worth like 10 of the others, it seems like. Even though I think Aragorn's supposed to be the fiercest of the ass kickers, but I just think it's amazing, and it's still like there's a couple of creaky CGI elements, but the cave troll I think mostly holds up because it's in a dark dank and there's not a lot of like light bouncing around.
Yeah, for sure.
The way they played the cave troll is kind of like a simple child. Like he's not really evil. He's kind of been, but like he wouldn't want to be doing any of this stuff. They've like put him up to it. It's kind of like sad. When his death is kind of played on a somber note. I like that. I love like how the whole fellowship like goes lights on fire when Frodo looks like he gets skewered. And then they all just kind of like get this battle frenzy from the hobbits down to everybody. I thought that's really cool. And even to like the attention to detail, like every orc faction has a slightly different aesthetic. Like these, I think, are like what you would call goblins. They're like slightly smaller. They got the big, dark adapted eyes. They look different from the Mordor orcs, who look different from the Uruk-hai. Like it feels real. Like these things have been out here for 1,000 years, and they've started to adapt to their conditions. I think that's, and they have different individual. Like these guys' armor is like black and beetle-like. I wonder, because it looks like it's better. And I wonder if that's because they have all this dwarfen steel that they're able to use, where all the other orcs are using like wrought iron shit and like just very primitive cleavers and whatnot.
I mean, that's where the passion behind the scenes comes through, right? Like it'd be so easy to just say, well, the orcs are the orcs. Let's load them up with the same gear. Let's load them up the same makeup. Done.
You mentioned that the staircase has the scene with its collapsing has like the last moment of comedy. I do think that even in the theatrical version, that staircase scene is a lot. It breaks up the momentum of them desperately running from this Balrog and just sets into a 5-minute Indiana Jones action piece where they're tossing dwarves and teeter-totter and all this stuff. It's visually impressive for sure, but I felt like it kind of harms the pacing.
Yeah, you're probably right. That's not a moment where you necessarily want to have a lot of like slowdown.
Yeah, like I would love to see a cut of this where they go from fleeing the big chamber and then instantly the Balrog, they just barely make it out across the bridge and then the Balrog is there.
Yeah.
But like I said, I do like the dwarf stuff and the beard, and it's pretty good. Plus, it's got some of the sickest archery. Like Legolas is nailing those 300-yard headshots. Some of that stuff is very cool, and I'm glad it's in there. But
it's so effective because they're just like flopping arrows at their feet, right? They can barely even get the arrow that far, the goblins or the orcs. And he's just nailing him.
Because he's just better. Elf blood. You think Aragorn's blood's good? Whew, elf blood. Also, so the Balrog is one of the. That's another one that I remember thinking, like, what is this thing going to look like? Because it was an intense debate. The book, it's described very metaphorically in the book, and then there's a little bit of stuff in the Silmarillion about like masses of Balrog armies and whatnot. But there's like all these debates about, did the Balrog have wings? Like, what does something that's made out of flame and shadow even look like? Because those are two contradictory things. And, I've seen different takes on them, and I never was quite satisfied. But when the Balrog jumps out of that pit, like, nope, fucking, this is a Balrog. That's exactly what flame and shadow looks like. It's like a living volcano thing. Does it have wings? Yeah, I think, but could they also be just shadow? And what is real about this mythical thing? It's amazing, and his standoff with Gandalf just works. Gandalf standoff.
Yeah, and you don't need a bunch of like energy shooting from their fingers or anything, right? It's all about will. It's all about some intangible power that they have.
Yeah,
and ultimately Gandalf wins that, right? Like. That's the thing that I think is so great is Gandalf wins that, and it's only by essentially an accident that he's dropped into this pit. Yeah,
and also it really hinges on Ian McKellen being able to summon up every bit of his personal power and scream, "You shall not pass," and you believe it.
Absolutely.
Like it's going to be your ass if you cross it. Yeah, it's your ass, and you do get him with. And then I don't care if this is in the extended edition or if this is in a theatrical, but when you open up with. So Gandalf tumbles into the pit and he's dead. But then you find out he's actually been kicking this Balrog's ass for the rest of the movie. And like the scene of them falling to the center of the earth and like this old ass man taking this like extreme skydiving position to catch up to the Balrog and just start whipping its ass, like fist fighting and sword fighting. And it should be ridiculous, but it's so fucking cool. And that... Again, spoilers for the second movie, or it might even be the third, where there's this wide shot of them reaching the ocean at the middle of the earth, and it's just like they're just like tiny, like a shooting star falling together. Oh my god, that visual, I love it so much. And then his "Fly, you fools." I think there's also these great moments where Aragorn like can't rip his eyes, like he's waiting for Gandalf to like get back up. And he's like dodging arrows and stuff, and it's all in slow motion. And Howard Shore's going for broke on the score. Man, can we talk about how Orlando Bloom is like 18 years old and not a great actor at this point yet?
I didn't realize he was that young. But yeah,
this is his first role, and it might be bullying to point this out, and it's not. It doesn't ruin the movie. But whoever thought it was a good idea to direct Orlando is like, okay, here's the deal. You're an elf, and you've hung out with elves your whole life, and you might not have ever experienced death. And you should be like confused about the whole concept of death. Like, what the hell's going on? It does not work at all. Everyone else is like giving these A+, 10 out of 10 grief performances. And I think there's an idea there of like, surely an elf is aware of the concept of things dying.
Yeah.
But like he might not have actually felt this kind of grief before. Like what is this in my but he plays it as if he doesn't understand mechanically what has happened, and he's just not good enough to do it, and it sucks. I don't know. I don't know how he could have done it better, but you didn't do a great job, Mr. Bloom.
I didn't even realize that's what he was going for. So, yeah.
Anyway, but there's also the Jackson said that when he directed Frodo, because there's that famous shot of Frodo trying to get away from the Fellowship at this stage, and Aragorn calls him back, and he turns around like with a single tear. And Jackson said when you turn around, I want audiences to almost be frightened of your grief. Like, you should look like a man who's seen a concentration camp or some shit.
Mhm.
And I felt like that's you know, as bad as the Orlando direction was, that was spot on, because I felt like all that worked.
Yeah.
One of the other things they do with Saruman's arc is one of the recurring themes of the Lord of the Rings and even the Silmarillion is like jealousy of something that other people have. Like men are jealous of elves' immortality and they try to take it for themselves. These, like, God created all these angels, and I know Tolkien hated this being called an allegory, but I don't know. Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, swims like a duck. The God created all these lesser angels that then aided him in creation, and one of those guys was jealous that he couldn't create. So he tried, like, everything he created in imitation of God turned out to be a mockery. Like, he tried to create man and he ended up making orcs. He tried to create Ents and he ended up making trolls. And Saruman here is like, got that bug. Like, he's this very powerful angelic creature, but he wants to create things. And his idea of what turns out to be perfection is this twisted, you know, animal war race that can do nothing but destroy things. Again, it's not like
it perfection, right?
He claims perfection, and I don't think you get the barest hint of the theme, but it is there if you want to discover it, which I think is cool. What do you have anything that you want to say about, like, Lothlorien? Because Cate Blanchett is amazing. She's kind of enigmatic. Like, I don't know what you make out of Galadriel.
That's what I thought. Nothing. Like, she has some extraordinarily cryptic dialogue that means absolutely nothing to me. Where she's like reckoning with something, but I don't know what it is, and I assume it's all just foreshadowing for shit that's going to happen later. I really didn't think anything of it, and I actually wasn't impressed by most of what happened here. Like, I don't know why there's this big love story between, you know, Arwen and is it Aragorn? I didn't get any of that. Like, these are all just characters I just met, and I guess they have a history, okay, but I'm not feeling it in that moment. With, you know, this exchange of immortality and all that stuff. And also, I wasn't super impressed with Lothlorien as a location. I thought Rivendell was... Rivendell's beautiful. Like, that whole city just glows. Literally glows. And Lothlorien was kind of like a just muted version. A muted blue version.
It's like a black light festival, you know, like stoner basement aesthetic. Well, that's high elf versus the woods elf, you know? They're just like the bumfuck country bumpkin elves.
No, this whole sequence did nothing for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, there's tons of stuff. Like, I love the Temptation of Galadriel, where she's like offered this, and like that was her final test. Like, she now thinks she's worthy to go to heaven at this point. But
yeah, none of that made sense. It's all like context. It's all contextless stuff that I assume means a lot to somebody who's steeped in the lore.
Did you get to, because like, I think the one thing they did well is when she like ponders what it would be like to have the ring, and she says, instead of a Dark Lord, you shall have a queen. And like, she talks a mess, but I think she does sell the terribleness, like how, like, you know, Galadriel is a dangerous, powerful person. By her will alone has she almost single-handedly kept Mordor out of her kingdom. And she has one of the rings of power, which you probably don't know as well.
No.
But I thought that they really, it's an interesting effect where they almost like negative. They somehow dressed her in this steel cuirass, like breastplate, and like give this kind of like almost underwater and photo negative that turns this beautiful woman into this like dark twisted thing. Similar to like Gandalf swelling up in the Bag End. And I thought, like, even if you don't, did you get that? Like, was that, because I just got chills the first time I saw that.
I thought that she was being tempted, and there was this dark power that could have come to the surface, and especially with the ring, she could be dangerous. But like, I guess at that point I didn't care, because I'm like, okay, the ring tempts everybody. Like, it's nothing new. You know, Bilbo, Gandalf, everybody's been tempted by this ring. to see that again didn't do much for me.
It's too bad because of the extended edition. There's a whole. Like, it turns out that Galadriel is Arwen's grandmother, and there's this great scene where she kind of takes Aragorn aside and be like, "Hey, I see that soul stone you got. What the fuck you doing, man? Like, when you going to stop all this ranging and all this striding and settle down and get a real job and, you know, provide for my grandchild?" Like, there's a little bit of that, like what you're missing about all these interpersonal. She fills that kind of stuff in, and I thought that's great scenes. But again, this is a slow section of the movie already. There's another even better, where like Boromir and Aragorn have this like interesting conversation about, you know, going to the White City. I mean, there's a little bit of that, but there's a much more extended cut where Boromir is just, because Aragorn's part in this story, and they cut most of this out, is that he thinks that men just can't cut it. Like, he doesn't want to lead them because he doesn't believe in himself and he doesn't believe in the strength of men. Like, all he can see is the past failures of his ancestors. Like, every single one of them has just been a failure and led to things being worse than better. And he's like kind of like he's the guy that doesn't want to grab the trolley switch and choose between one person dying and 5, right? Like, I'll just fuck it up and somehow 20 people will die. And Boromir is just like, really, they have this like great conversation, but then he gets frustrated with like, you know, you're so quick to trust these elves. Like, we come to Rivendell and we go to Lothlorien and it's all like, oh, you're just, you know, you implicitly trust them and there's no problems. But, you know, yes, there's frailty in men, but there's also strength and honor, and you never see that because you just didn't. And I thought it's great. It shows how desperate Boromir is, because he thinks this guy just is all with the elves and they're going to throw away this one shot to save the last great city of mankind. And it's to what? Trust the machinations of elves. And it seems, and it really establishes his character, which makes his fall later on in this movie and redemption more powerful. But again, this is already a very slow scene in the movie. So, I love, like, you know, this probably doesn't mean anything to you, but like seeing the Argonath, the big statues of Isildur and his brother, like at the I think the southern extent of Gondor, is really cool. Like, because I always thought those were like, visually reading these books, Tolkien describes all this shit. I'm like, man, I can't wait to see this stuff, and it looks fucking amazing. Yeah. Just the scenery, them paddling these like beautiful leaf-shaped boats down this river that's, you know, again, other than the statues, it's all New Zealand. I guess the waterfall is the one thing that's actually from, I think, Africa or South America, and they composited it into the scene.
Huh. Okay. The one they send his body over.
Yeah. That's like one little foot. That's like the only non-New Zealand scenery in the whole series.
Huh.
But yeah, I don't know, like Boromir failing his test versus Aragorn. Like, I think it's a very beautiful, moving thing where Aragorn approaches Frodo and you think he's going to do what everyone else does, and then he doesn't. I'm kind of getting low-key choked up just thinking about it. And in Boromir, like, I thought, like, I don't know, what do you think of like Boromir's confrontation with Frodo? Did that work without all the background, or?
Yeah, it did. They had done enough with Boromir. That sense that he wanted the ring, that he was not actually strong-willed enough to resist it. He might be the one character in this entire movie, aside from maybe Bilbo, who wasn't strong-willed enough. Yeah. So that when he had that turn, it made a lot of sense to me.
And then to contrast that with Aragorn, who's just a little bit, you know, his moral fibers is a little bit stronger than Boromir. Yeah. And also Boromir's horrific reaction of what he did, and trying to make up for it, I think is a great story.
And also, like, man, the battle that happens because of that.
Dude, that part where right after this, Aragorn's like, you got to get out of here, Frodo. And he turns around and there's just a massive army of orcs, and he salutes them and just starts taking them all on, is so fucking badass. And just when it's too much for him, here comes Gimli. And like Legolas shooting these arrows like it's like a fucking semi-automatic rifle. Oh God. That's great. Legolas is, I don't know. Like, some of his later scenes get overshadowed because they're too much. Like, I'm not a big fan of him surfing down staircases on a shield. I do kind of like the one thing where he's maybe more badass is when he single-handedly takes down that war elephant in the last movie. But this scene, like, this is Legolas's time to shine. He's just whipping so much ass. And all these like
Boromir. I mean, like that battle. I'm a sucker for that trope where like a character takes what should be a fatal shot, right, and gets back up and fights again, takes another shot that should also be fatal, gets back up, continues fighting. It takes so much to bring them down. I'm a huge fan of that. Gets me going every time.
And I don't know who they did all the choreography, but like they sell it. Like, and these arrows are like fucking dowel rods, man. They're like broom handles.
Yeah, they're huge arrows. Shot by like the leader of the Uruk-hai, right? Like,
yeah, with this big ass 7-foot warbow. So you know it's like he's gonna get shot by 2x4s. Yep. And you can feel the sound design as each one hits into him, and he like sinks to his knees, but he always has got, and every time he gets back up, there's a little bit less. Like, you know, he's desperately fighting these orcs, but every single time he takes an arrow, he's just barely deflecting at the last time. He's barely able to finish this guy. And like, there's this one scene where he almost lets gravity drive the killing stroke into the orc. He doesn't have anything left in the tank. And just as this orc is about to coup d'etat this guy, Aragorn says, "No, fuck you," and has another one of these. Like, I felt like there's very few movie fights I actually think that people are trying to kill each other. Like, when I see like Pierce Bronson and that one foppish blonde guy fighting in one of the lesser Bonds, it's like these guys are just like, oh yeah, you move your wrist like this, I'll move my wrist like that, and you know, chink chink chink, Errol Flynn stuff. Every one of these chops that the Uruk-hai has taken at Aragorn looks like it's going to decapitate or dismember him, and Aragorn's given as good as he gets. It's like, I love that scene where he pins him to his head to the tree with the shield, and like Aragorn, you buy the desperation, like fuck.
Yeah, my head. If I don't get out of this, my head's gone. Like,
did you know that like Viggo Mortensen actually batted that sword, that dagger out of the air with a sword, like first take? Like, really? Peter Jackson's like, well, we might have to let's just give it a try, and he does it.
Wow. Okay, like, the guy who had never held a sword before, huh? Is now batting sword daggers out of the air with it.
Hey, if you want a good time, look into Viggo Mortensen's personal history. This guy is kind of like, you know what, like Daniel Day-Lewis did to kind of like work himself up the like Last of the Mohicans. I think that's how Viggo just lives.
Out in the woods, just
playing lutes and balancing one-footed on rocks in the middle of streams while like, you know, rabbits and bluebirds are landing on him. He just seems like he's kind of half elf himself. He famously adopted his horse in this movie and became like an accomplished horseman since then. He's just a really cool dude. Like, every interview I've ever read of this guy, he's like a fucking sage. It's amazing. Look up some interviews of him. But yeah, I guess there's also this like
the whole ending of this movie works for me. Like this I said, the bookends of this thing are really, really strong. And you needed it. Like, coming out of this movie, I would have been really disappointed if it just kind of ended on a middling to flat note. You needed to really punch it up, because you're going into the next portion of this movie. You got to be excited about it. So,
and they have
it worked.
They have a little bit of help, because even though this is act 1 of a 3-act play, Tolkien himself writing these knows he needs like a little bit of climax. Now, it's funny, in book 2 and 3, they kind of fucked that up because they rearrange things. But in every one of the books, there's a nice little climax, and this definitely delivers. I love that shot where Boromir is like blowing the horn and keeping the hobbits behind him, and they establish him, and then they pull back, and you see this like waterfall of orcs that are swarming toward them in this valley. And I guess they used one of those like cameras on like a 2-wire setup that they use like in football games, so it can kind of just like hover. Like, before they had drones, they're doing a drone shot of this that's just amazing. Like, I'm thinking about like every time they reset that, 100 different dudes has to go back and find their place and like just swarm over this hill again, and Boromir's got to blow. It's pretty crazy. Also, there's a great little like a New Hope stormtrooper bangs his head shot when Aragorn is starting to have this personal moment with Boromir. There's an orc that's dead on the ground that lifts his head up because he thinks it's like in between takes, and then like realizes he's supposed to be dead and lays back down.
God.
it's funny to look for, and once you see it, you'll see it in every single time through. But then they have this. Go ahead.
I was gonna say they end on a pretty emotionally resonant note as well. Like that's the thing, they haven't succeeded here, right? And in fact, they think they've essentially failed. They expect that Frodo's going off to his doom. He's not going to make it, and they can no longer support him, which I think is the real blow. They failed as a group, right? The Fellowship has failed.
The Fellowship's broken. Yeah.
Yeah. But they do what they can, and they go off to save their friends. And I think like dividing them up at this point is great, especially when you have two of the perceived weakest characters going off on their own, and a couple of the strongest, three of the strongest going off on their own to save their friends. I think it's a really just beautiful ending to this film, an emotionally resonant ending.
Oh, it's certainly, especially since this kicks like. This whole movie, Aragorn has been refusing the call, like the Joseph Campbellian call to be a hero. And here he's so moved by Boromir's sacrifice that he, like on a death pledge, like, I don't know what strength I've got here, but I tell you what, buddy, if I got it in me, I'm not going to let our people fall. And then there's this scene, like, I don't think a lot of people notice this, but Aragorn actually takes Boromir's bracers that have the symbol of the White City on them and ties them to his own personal gauntlets, like as if he is now finally taking up the mantle of the king that's going to eventually return. And yeah, his line reading where he's like, we'll not abandon our friends to torment and death. Let's hunt some orc, and like his natural leadership, getting this elf and dwarf that kind of low-key hated each other this whole movie. They're like, now fucking like, yeah, hell yeah, let's go hunt some orc.
Yeah.
And Sean Austin and Elijah Woods has a beautiful scene where Frodo doesn't trust nobody.
Yeah.
But Sam just won't like, look, I'm either going to follow you or die.
Mm-hmm.
And Frodo can't let it happen. There's a lot said about this masculine, friendship and relationship and the love that these two men have for each other. But I'd still think it's, Elijah Woods, these giant blue expressive eyes, tear your heart out every single time. And
Sure.
I guess something else I thought was amazing is they actually shot a whole battle scene where the orcs peel off and force Frodo into the water, and like he's desperately fighting them off and getting to the boat. And Peter Jackson's like looking at the dailies like, what are we doing? This isn't Frodo versus the orcs. This is Frodo versus his inner nature and the ring. And it can only be about that. And they change it to just him this shot with the words of Gandalf going through his head that like, we don't get to choose. All we get to choose is what we're doing next. And the director's commentary track was like, they had 20 different paths they could have gone down that each one would have weakened the movie and made it lesser. And they somehow, through some instinct, always took the right path, with rare exception.
Yeah.
And then, like the final shot of Frodo and Sam looking at that, like, like the last of the good land is behind them. It's nothing but hell lying ahead. It's so iconic and so amazing and beautiful. And they've color corrected it all to hell, and they've added a bunch of special weather effects, but it's just great. It's amazing. So,
I have one question. So the Uruk-hai were commanded to bring them Frodo, right? Bring Saruman Frodo, kill the others. They don't kill the others. They take Pippin and Merry with them alive, very much alive. Is that because they don't know which Hobbit has the ring?
They're exactly right. They're given orders to grab the hobbits and return them unspoiled to Saruman, who can then deliver them. They figure out who's got the one and take it to Mordor. Okay. And also, these guys are personally loyal to Saruman. And so technically they should probably just take it straight to Mordor, but he wants that boon to cement his relationship with Sauron.
Sure.
Or maybe actually take the ring for himself.
Yeah.
And rule Middle Earth.
Who can say?
'Cause I don't know that Saruman actually thinks he's evil at this point. He might think that like what he needs to like all these elves and men is going to fuck shit up. These guys were these angelic kind of wizard figures were sent to guide and mentor Middle Earth through all their different strifes, and I think he thinks this is his ultimate mission. Like this is what he's supposed to be doing. But I don't know. I guess
was there any of that in the fight scene between him and Gandalf, because I will admit during that fight scene all I was looking at was Gandalf spinning on his nose or whatever, and how silly that all looked. I was completely ignoring the dialogue if there was some about it.
No, I mean, like, there's a lot in the lead up where he's like, I've seen everything. I've seen there's no way to beat this guy. We need to join our forces with him. And that's when he does, like, tell me, my friend, when does the blah, blah, blah turn to madness? But yeah. And again, I don't know how much of that is actually in the book that, like, Saruman is he actually evil? Because, he's making these orcs. They look pretty evil. But, what does that even mean? Like, Tolkien didn't know it was kind of gauche to just nakedly code evil people to be ugly and dark and this stuff like that. But I thought it's also like there's like this long ass credit sequence, and Peter Jackson talks through most of it, and he talks about his personal feelings. Because if you're mad at me for saying that you like that I thought the theatrical versions are better films, he agrees. He says, I don't consider this the director's cut. The director's cut implies that the studio took something away and made it lesser, and the director's cut restores it to the full glory. This is literally an extended edition. It's got more stuff in it, stuff that I think some of it would have worked well in the movie, some of it that I think is really great and great material but destroys the pacing of the film. But this isn't like my favorite version of the film. This is just an extended version for hardcore fans. And I think it plays like that. Like if you like I said, I think I'd be very curious to see what you would think about a 4-hour cut of this movie, because that's about what it is when they added all the stuff back into it. Because for casual fans that like really like this, but like people like you don't like fantasy, but they like this. I don't know that would I'm not a big fan of nerds making their casual friends watch the extended versions, or be like, well, if you don't watch the extended versions, you're not watching it at all, because if you can't get enough, you're right. But some people this is just enough, and some people this is a little too much.
Just tolerable. Like I enjoy it because it moves quick, and because there are moments of levity, and because there's exciting action. And some heartfelt emotional moments. I don't love it because I love the lore. The lore is the shit that I could care less about in this movie. So it succeeds despite its source material in a lot of ways for me. I don't know.
There's a lot, like I said, that I think it destroys the pacing, but I love the nine getting all their gifts from Galadriel, because in the movie all you get is the stuff that you must know because it becomes important in the plot, like, Frodo getting that vial of starlight.
Oh, right. That's foreshadowing for a future movie, right?
Exactly. But they all get individual gifts, and I think some of that stuff is cool. I even think I love Legolas's infamous Limbus bread commercial, where he like almost directly turns to the camera and says, "Limbus bread, one bite can keep a grown man fed for days." There's magic elven bread that they because Tolkien tries to answer a lot of people's questions, like how the hell are these guys going to survive? Well, they got special magic bread. And
I was absolutely thinking, like, man, that horse must be carrying a lot of supplies. But
yeah, there's a lot of like interesting kind of funny things about that. Oh, that's the other thing. The one technical detail I forgot to mention is Galadriel is one of the few elves that remembers the time that's still left in Middle Earth, that remembers the time when they had these magic trees that before the moon and the sun was created, they lit the world. And they talk about that light being that ancient light still reflecting out of her eyes. And Peter Jackson, to play homage to that, they usually light characters with, like, they call it a pupil light or an eye light that like gives you that little like anime gleam in your eye. Yeah. With her, he took like a ball of Christmas lights and used that for it. So when you look really close, it looks like she's got like a star constellation reflected in her eye. And ever since I saw that in the behind the scenes, I love seeing those notes. And there's tons. There's like, if you watch these special features, every fucking 30 seconds, you'll see a love letter to Tolkien in the background that you would never pick out unless you're like an Uber fan or the person that worked on it. And yeah, if you are a fan of these films, I highly recommend the special features on the Blu-rays and DVDs, because first of all, it's a year of film school. How much does that cost? Second, it's just so much detail packed in. It will destroy some of the magic, because you also can't help but notice some of the effects and stuff that the
stilts and the long gloves.
Yeah, and how they do, like, some of that stuff is really cool. And man, I wish they would. I wish every couple of years they'd get that exhibit out and have a tour again. I think it would make a lot of money because like
Yeah.
part of the exhibit was they had the mock-up of like that cart that Ian McKellen and Elijah Wood rode on, and you could pose with a friend of yours, and they do the exact same camera angle, so it looks like you're a massive and they're a hobbit. They give you like a souvenir photo of it, and like just seeing how that physically works, is so cool. And you get it, you can see it on the you know, because they show like here's the camera angle, and then they pan over, and you can kind of see the effect lose, but like being there and actually doing that shit is super cool.
Yeah.
Okay, before we go, Dr. John had a lightning round of questions he wanted to ask us. Number one, which film in the trilogy is your favorite?
It's been almost 20 years, man. This one, because it's the one I've seen most recently. Like, I legitimately couldn't tell you. There's a spider in one of them. The Mount Doom scenes are cool. Like, I can't tell you most of what happens in the next two. So this one currently.
I mean, there's amazing parts in all of them. But it's hard to beat Return of the King. It's hard to beat the exclamation point at the end of this. You know, you could quibble with the 17 different endings that it has, but there's amazing action, like the massive battles in all their glory. All of everyone's arcs coming to an end. All that stuff is, I don't know, it just really works. The personal, all the different heroism coming together. The last charge of the Rohirrim, the Theoden's speech before that, like there's a bunch of like A+. It's too bad because Aragorn's speech about the I see in you the very fear that would snatch the heart of me away is actually B tier compared to fucking Theoden's crazy, you know, ride now for wrath and for ruin, on like, you know, clanging swords with all of his dude spears as he rides down to combat. Like it's hard to beat that, and it's too bad that Aragorn had to follow that because technically his speech should be even better. But yeah, I guess Return of the King is my favorite. Yeah,
that's the one with the minister stuff in it, right? Like the White City.
Yeah, and the spider.
Yeah,
all
that
shit's
stuff really cool. I remember being super impressed by the scale of that thing.
Yeah, and I just like, man, the Eagles always get me. Like when they when the everything looks lost and like the ring wraiths come in with their fell beast, and it's like, oh, these guys are gonna get ripped apart, and the Eagles come out of nowhere, start whipping their ass. It's good stuff. Good stuff. Lord of the Rings versus Game of Thrones, books and visual medium.
I haven't read either of them.
Man, it's tough. Like Game of Thrones gets marked with an incomplete grade. Like I can't even give it an F. It's just incomplete. I'm disappointed. This had so much potential. I'm writing in red in the margins. I think it could have dethroned Lord of the Rings because Lord of the Rings it's very high fantasy. It's very not relatable. Where the intricate plotting and machinations and stuff at Game of Thrones, it's not just black and white, good and evil. It could have been better, but it certainly did not, it did not get there. If you want to debate like Game of Thrones seasons 1 through 6 versus Lord of the Rings, Fellowship, and Two Towers, it's still tough. But,
not for me. I pick Game of Thrones every time in that scenario, but yeah. I mean, the ending is such a sour note on Game of Thrones that I don't even know if I could choose it. Even though I don't even remember the last 2 movies of Lord of the Rings, I still feel like it doesn't deserve it.
No, I mean, Tolkien's got Return of the King, and Game of Thrones got get this bitch out of here. Like it's
right.
it's not even the same.
Yeah.
This next question, number 3, theories on why Peter Jackson never quite made it back to this level of filmmaking. I mean, he's still a young man, right? Like,
I mean, he's still a man. Sure, he still exists.
And I think The Hobbit was something he got forced into for good intentions, and is just, it is like the one thing where the studio just interfered way too much in. And maybe he was, I don't know. Like I don't got it in me to watch the bonus features of The Hobbit. But I understand that there's a whole lot of like, first of all, there was the studio like really beat up New Zealand's film community to make this on a bare bones budget, whereas before it was kind of a bonanza that launched it, and there was a lot of people that they wouldn't pay, and they're like Peter Jackson put a premium on getting these 9 guys together and have a hangout and be friends, so that would translate and everyone gets a little peace, so there's no jealousy and everyone feels like this kinship and bond. And they didn't do that. There's a lot of compositing actors together, and people not there's a lot of shortcuts and corner cutting that affected everyone's kind of like ownership of it. So that said, Peter Jackson still has 15, 20 plus years ahead of him. It wouldn't surprise him if he did something cool.
Yeah.
Hopefully
crazy.
not any. Yeah.
I kind of think of Peter Jackson as a independent, like amateur style filmmaker. Because all the stuff that I associate with Peter Jackson before this is all much smaller budgets, much more like avant-garde, just like let's jam a camera in here and let's go at these crazy, rubber-faced zombies with a lawnmower kind of thing. Like, it has this gonzo sort of feel to it that is present in this film in places, but
you can definitely see the classic Peter Jackson in places for sure.
In a couple of spots, but for the most part, like the whole movie is like this mainstream big budget feel to it. And so when I think like, oh, Peter Jackson would go on after this to do something just as big or epic or mainstream, that kind of doesn't make sense to me. It might be the case where he doesn't want to do that stuff. He just wants to have like that control that you get with sort of independent style filmmaking. And he can't find that in outside of like this crazy, like we talked about how crazy this project is that it even happened, right? That you give this guy a whole bunch of money and create all these crazy processes and stuff that's never been done. If he can't find that scenario again, maybe he doesn't want to do it.
I mean, he's taking a shot like King Kong, a 3-hour King Kong film. That was kind of gonzo, and it didn't crater. It's kind of foreshadowed the Hobbit of like, ooh, there's a lot of excess in this movie. Mortal Engines was garbage.
He did that.
He didn't direct it. He produced it, and I guess he handpicked a director and he wrote it. But that movie is bad.
I didn't even bother seeing it because the concept looks so stupid.
No, he might. I mean, like I said, he might be a George Lucas where he did his best work and as a young man with a lot of vigor and a lot of big ideas. And I haven't gone back and seen some of his smaller, serious but independent films like Heavenly Creatures? Is that the one that everyone talks about?
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, that's the one that's got not Kate Blanchett, the woman, the Draw Me Like Your French Girls.
Kate Winslet. Yeah.
Kate Winslet. That's the one's got Kate Winslet about these like serial killer murders from New Zealand or Australia that everyone thinks holds that movie in high esteem. I'd like to see that because I think he could definitely go back to doing that. But I don't know, bigger stuff, like especially since it feels like he has a little bit. It's got to be bigger and better and more epic than it can. But man, you can't. When you hit Lord of the Rings, there's nowhere to go but down. It's like going to the North Pole and saying, I got to go norther. You can't, man. Sure. You can go as north, but you can't go norther. Yeah. So I don't know. But again, his career's not over. But I do think that also The Hobbit, again, everything I've read behind the scenes, like that kind of broke his back as far as dealing with the Hollywood system and fighting with them and the crushing amount of work and stress. It just... Maybe he needs to go back and do some Heavenly Creatures type stuff.
Yeah, and finally, as somebody, like I know a whole bunch about like through like Adam Savage and Tested and like that whole crew spends a lot of time like at Weta or talking with Peter Jackson and they're all friends and stuff. And I get the impression that he is very much a guy who loves the craft of it. Like he wants to get in there and do like really crazy innovative things. He enjoys like that model making kind of mentality. How compatible is that with big budget filmmaking? I can't imagine it's the same experience.
Yeah, because I don't think that I don't know how many bigatures they made for the Hobbit series. I don't think it's nearly as many as they did for this, and probably is a lot of CGI compositing, even in just the stunt works and stuff. And I can imagine. Now that everything's so mature, this weird hybrid thing where like a shocking amount of it's real.
Yeah.
with just a little bit of movie magic to make everything work. Like I don't, if that's true, then I imagine just the modern Hollywood blockbuster, studios are going to pay for that. Fucking do
No.
it and do it digitally. That way, if
Yeah.
we don't like it, we can just redo it.
Sure.
I saw that might. I can see kind of being brokenhearted about that if you're a real craftsman. Finally, Dr. John wants to know, what are you looking forward to with the Amazon series? And that's a great question.
I was looking forward to this story being drawn out into, 30 plus hours or whatever, telling the story with more, the context that I feel I'm missing here, the character development I feel I'm missing here. Apparently, it's not going to be this Third Age Lord of the Rings story. It's going to be something else. So I'm a little bummed about that now.
Yeah, I think if I understand the new project, that its climax will be the prologue of this movie. Like, everything will build up to the first War of the Ring, and you'll have all this, Isildur and his dad and brother marshaling the human forces, and Elrond riding forth, and there'll be Gandalf there and Galadriel, and I don't know, will they do the fall of Numenor and all that kind of stuff? But it's not going to be this, and that's why it's like, I definitely could. I'm not as excited for this as some other things because I just don't know what they'll make of it. It's going to be shot in Middle Earth, aka New Zealand. I imagine a lot of the special effects people and the craftsmen will be the same. So you got that going for us. But like the other thing is like the casting of this film. I love these books and read them many, many times. In fact, I read them all before the movies came out. Right before I got a new editions of them. And I had built up mental images through looking at all these picture books and artwork of like what all these things looked like. And they just knocked it out of the park. They got the perfect Frodo, the perfect Gandalf, the perfect Aragorn, seemingly by accident in some of these cases, because they kind of lucked, backed in like, oh shit, this Aragorn sucks. Who can we get? I liked what the Mortensen guy did on G.I. Jane. He seems like he could be somebody who's gruff and tough. Let's bring him in there. And he ends up being half elf. It's about like the cast and the story and all that Silmarillion and appendix stuff from Lord of the Rings. Is that going to work? Because that's not adapting something great. It's reading an encyclopedia or a Wikipedia article about something, and then like read an encyclopedia article about World War I, and now make an entertaining story about it.
Yeah, craft a narrative.
Yeah, or like, what we saw the Double D's did, like, adapting great works versus working with a few bullet points. That's tricky. They got a big budget and they got some decent talent attached to it, but like, will it be the Lord of the... I can't imagine it will be this generational once in a lifetime kind of thing, like the way Lord of the Rings ended up being. I don't. But I'm looking forward to being back in this world, because I enjoy the being back in Middle. That's why I sat through all the fucking Hobbit movies, because I love this world so much. And when it works, it really works. So, any other last thoughts, or should we get out of here, Jim?
No, let's get out of here. Let's run.
Dr. John, thank you very much for forcing us to watch this long-ass movie. I watched 4 hours of film. Actually, I watched 1,000 hours of Middle-earth shit over the last 20 years and spent hundreds more reading my 43 years on Earth to prepare for this podcast.
Which is why I only had to watch 3 hours. So thank you for that.
And yeah, I think this might be our longest podcast ever that wasn't like a marathon, the charity thing. So thank you for commissioning it. If commissioning a podcast sounds like a good idea to you, go to support.baldmove.com, click on the commission a podcast link, and it will have all the details on how much it costs and the process. And if you pull the trigger, Jim and I will be in touch to get your notes and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's how you do that. And again, thank you very much, Dr. John, for commissioning this. I had a lot of fun recording this with my buddy. And I hope you enjoy it. Hope everyone enjoys it. That will be it for this week's Bald Move Pulp. My God, we might have to make this a 2 installment thing. 3.
3-parter, yeah. Let's expand it. Let's talk another hour. We got 3 hours.
Fellowship of the Pod. And then we'll have the 2 podcasters. And then it'll be Return of the Bullshit. But yeah, we hope everybody enjoys it. And we'll see you back next time on Pulp. Until then, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Jim.
See ya.